Hey, so in this video I will build an app which is known as Random Code Machine, and this app basically what it does is it has a button and it has some display space, and every time you click that button this app should display a new quote and its respective author. Now there are a couple of other aspects to this app which we will review in a minute, but basically in a nutshell that's what this app does. All right, and that's the app that we're going to build. Now in case you're curious as to where this app idea originated from, well, this app is part of a project for one of the certification courses on the website FREECODECAMP.org. For those of you who may not be familiar with the site, this is one of the most prominent websites in the world which is dedicated to teaching people how to code for free. And the way they go about doing that is they offer a whole bunch of certification courses, with each certification course containing lots of learning material. And at the end of each certification, the students or the learners are expected to complete a series of projects in order to earn that particular certification. So this app is part of a certification which I believe is known as Front-End Development Libraries Certification course. All right, so that's a quick info on the background of this app. Now, as I said, in this video I'll build this app from scratch, and I'll do so in about 5 steps. So let me outline what those steps are. All right, so step number 1, we will review the requirements. Obviously we need to understand what to build in this app, so we have to review the requirements. Step number 2, we will review the mockup. This is an end user app, so there are some look and feel end user sort of elements, UI elements, so we have to build that as part of building the HTML CSS, so that's why we will review the mockup. Then we will create the HTML CSS or code the HTML and CSS. All right, and then we will actually code the code using JavaScript, meaning code the JavaScript jQuery part. I'll be using mostly jQuery to code the logic. All right, so mostly jQuery for this. All right, and finally I'll give you a walkthrough of my GitHub repo or GitHub repository, so you can basically use the coding artifacts that I will build in this video. So basically that's the plan, guys. 5 steps, and hopefully at the end of this, end of this video, we hope to have a working app. So with that, let's jump into our first step, which is reviewing the requirements. The requirements are on this page. As you can see, this page is right off of the FreeCodeCamp website. So let's start reviewing the requirements right away. I'm going to skip over this whole part. This is some boilerplate language which basically tells you, where the template is and what languages you can use. So we don't need to review this. But let's jump right into the requirements, which are stated as user stories. So user story 1. I can see a wrapper element with a corresponding ID equals quote dash box. What this is saying is that, hey, on this app, on the page that contains the app, you should see an HTML element, and that HTML element must have an ID of quote dash box. Number 2, within quote dash box, I can see an element with a corresponding ID equals text. What this is saying is that, hey, inside that wrapper or that container, that element whose ID is quote dash box, there should be another element with an ID of text. Number 3, within quote dash box, I can see an element with a corresponding ID equals author. So once again, there should be another element within that overall element whose ID is quote dash box. There should be another element whose ID should be author. Okay. Number 4, within quote dash box, I can see a clickable element with a corresponding ID equals new dash quote. So once again, there is another element within that overall element whose ID is quote dash box. There should be another clickable element whose ID should be new dash quote. And when they say clickable element, we can reasonably assume that they are expecting a button, some sort of a button. All right, moving on to number 5. Within quote dash box, I can see a clickable A element with a corresponding ID equals tweet dash quote. So once again, within that overall box, overall element whose ID is quote dash box, there should be another clickable element, and this should be an A element, meaning an A tag, an HTML anchor tag, and that element must have an ID of tweet dash quote. All right, so basically what we can assume here is that there should be, we can basically implement requirement number 5 as a button, and within that button, or that button should be enclosed within some sort of an A tag whose ID should be tweet dash quote. All right, on first load, and I'm reading requirement number 6 now. On first load, my quote machine displays a random quote in the element with ID equals text. So whenever you load this app, whenever you load the page that contains this app, once the app is fully built, when you load the app, what should you see? Well, you should see a new quote, a new random quote in the element whose ID is text. Number 7, on first load, my quote machine displays the random quote's author in the element with ID equals author. So basically when you load this app, you should also see the author's name in the element whose ID is author. So if you summarize requirement number 6 and 7, what they're saying is that, hey, when you load this app for the first time, what should you see? You should see a new quote inside the element whose ID is text, and you should see the corresponding author's name displayed inside the element whose ID is author. Number 8, when the new quote button is clicked, my quote machine should fetch a new quote and display it in the text element. So what this is saying is that, hey, when you click this element, this button that has an ID of new dash quote, what should happen then? Well, this app should display a new quote in the element whose ID is text. Number 9, my quote machine should fetch new quote's author when the new dash quote button is clicked and displayed in the author element. So, this is self-explanatory. When you click the new quote button, basically you should also see the quote's author's name displayed inside the element whose ID is author. So again, if you summarize requirement 8 and 9, what this is saying is that, hey, whenever you click the new quote button, two things should happen. A new quote should be displayed in the element whose ID is text, and that quote's author's name should also be displayed inside the other element whose ID is author. Number 10, I can tweet the current quote by clicking on the tweet dash quote A element. This A element should include twitter.com/intent/tweet path in its href attribute to tweet the current quote. So what this requirement number 10 is saying is that, hey, remember that we are expected to have a element whose ID is tweet dash quote. Well, that A element must also have an href attribute, and that href attribute must have this path, twitter.com/intent/tweet. And finally, the last requirement, requirement number 11, the quote dash box wrapper element should be horizontally centered. Please run tests with browser's zoom level at 100% and page maximized. Again, fairly self-explanatory requirement. What this is saying is that, hey, that overall element, quote dash box, that contains every other element for this app, that should be horizontally centered. All right, so that pretty much brings us to the end, or concludes the requirements review. Fairly simple app, not a whole lot going on here. Hopefully you feel the same way. The rest of the stuff here is just generic verbiage giving you the template. We're not going to use this template to code. I'm going to use my own code editor, VS Code to code. So you don't need to read that, but you can do so at your own time, right? So with that, we can move on to now step number 2. We just finished step number 1. Let's move to step number 2 and review the mockup. So this is a simple mockup that I created. As you can see in this mockup, we have this container in the middle, this container with the white background. This is the container that contains every other element, right? So you probably guessed by now, based on reading the requirements, it is this white container that needs to have the ID quote dash box, all right? Because it is this container that contains everything that is going on with this app, right? The quote text, the text of the author's name here, the button here and these two other buttons here to tweet your code, and also the tweet your code, and also a button for Tumblr, which is not explicitly stated, but we can add it here because that's, you know, it's sort of, it'll give us another help us understand how to add different buttons within a particular app. All right, now again, not a whole lot going on here. So what we will do is, you know, there is a background here, there is a big element here, and that, you know, what you see in this dark green background is basically the big element, you know, and within this element we have this element with the white background, as I said, and this is this element that we will have to ID as quote dash box, right? And then there you have this quote, the actual quote, right? And remember, this quote must be inside an element whose ID is text, right? Also, I've chosen to put a opening quote icon. This is an icon here. There is double opening quotes, right? Some of the ideas that I saw online had this, so I decided to borrow it because it makes it look nicer, right? So basically, what you have in terms of element here is that you have a you know, you have the opening double quote, you have the text of the quote, and remember, this text of the quote must be inside the element whose ID is text. Then you have the author's name here, right? And then this is the button that does the changing of the quote. So every time you click this button, right, what should happen is that it should basically bring a new quote here, and it should also bring a a new author's name here. All right, and this button here, this is a button that should point to Tumblr. Again, this is not explicitly mentioned in the requirements, but I've added it. It should allow us to understand how to add another button. But this this button, which has the Twitter icon here, that is spelled out in the requirements, as you hopefully remember, right? So that is spelled out in the requirements. So we basically have to have a button that allows us to tweet, and this button must be enclosed within an A element, and that A element must have a particular path that we know from the requirements. All right. So basically that's it, guys. That's what we need to do here. This is a you know, the mockup that I created, and hopefully you are now clear on what we need to build. So this is what we need to code using our HTML CSS, create this sort of layout with this look and feel. And in terms of functionality, what should happen is that when you click on this button, a new quote should come here, and also a new author's name should come here. Another functionality that I've added here is that, which is not required, but I've added anyways, is that when you click this new quote button, of course it should get the new quote and its author, but it should also change some of the colors. So it should change this background color, right, that I'm changing my moving my cursor. You should change it to some color, and it should change the color of the text for the quote and the color of the text for the author's name to the same color, and it should also change the background color of these three buttons to the same color. So those are some additional things that I also would like to build in here just to make it a little more interesting. All right, so that's it, guys. So now we will jump into our next step, which is to create the HTML and CSS. All right, so let's now proceed to create our HTML and CSS for this app as part of step number 3. But before I do that, I want to mention something that I forgot to mention when I was giving the introductory information about this project. And the thing that I forgot to mention is about prerequisites, right? So what prerequisites would you need to have in order to follow along and make the most of this video? And those are, and that is basically, you would need, you know, familiarity, some level of familiarity with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and JQuery. As you know, I'll be using mostly JQuery to code this app, so you would need familiarity with these 4 topics. And the reasoning is obvious. This is not a video. This video is not a tutorial on any of these topics. Rather, this video we will use our knowledge on these topics to build an app. And so I cannot get too deep into sort of teaching HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery. And that is why it will be helpful if you had some level of familiarity with these 4 topics. All right, so I wanted to get that out of the way, and with that, let's jump right in and start, start coding creating our HTML CSS. So this is my code editor. This is the code editor that I will be using. It's VS Code, or Microsoft's VS Code, one of the most popular code editors in the world. You can use whatever you like, but I'll be using this. So first off, let's just create the file. Okay, let's just create our file. So I'm going to create an HTML file. Just gonna go in here. I'm going to save it. I'll save it in a folder. I'll just save it. You can save it anywhere. I'll save it in the same. Basically, I've created a folder which you can see the name is called Random Code Machine, where I will save this. And here I'm going to basically, as is the norm, call this our HTML file index.html. Okay. So there it is. Let's also create our CSS file. All right, so I've opened a file. I'm going to save it now and save it in the same folder. And as per norm, I'm going to call it styles.css. All right. And since we are creating our file, let's also open up and create our JavaScript file. Obviously, we're not going to be doing any JavaScript jQuery coding now. Now we're going to be focusing on HTML, CSS, but since we are creating files, it makes sense to get this out of the way at the same time as well. And so I'm going to call this file again script.js as per the usual convention, but you can call it whatever you like as long as you have the right suffix, which is the right file extension, which is .js, right? And obviously I'm going to save it in the same folder so that I don't have to mess with the paths. All right, so all we did now is create 3 files: an HTML file, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file, right? And obviously we're going to focus on the HTML and CSS for now. So let me go into my HTML file and let me just start typing in the boilerplate HTML to start creating our page according to the mockup that we just reviewed, right? So this is doctype.html. As you know, this tag basically informs the browser about the version of HTML we are using, and this indicates that we'll be using HTML5. Let me create the HTML tags. Okay, let me create the head tags here, and this is just boilerplate HTML structure that I'm creating, so hopefully you're aware of this. Now within the head tag, I'm going to give it a title. Okay, I'm going to give it a title. I placed 2 ending tags. I don't need that, so that's why I deleted one. I'll just call it Random Code Machine, right? The next, I would like to give the path to my, or build the reference, create the reference to my CSS file, since we've already have a CSS file that we created, an empty one obviously, but let's create or add the path using a link tag here. So I'm just typing the standard boilerplate link tag semantics. Okay, so there is the rel attribute, and there is the type attribute, CSS, and I will use the href attribute to point to the actual file, which, as you know, is styles.css. So we have the link tag here. Now I should also put my script tag here so that we basically take care of all the references that we need to add to the head section of the HTML. But before that, we need to address our JQuery. Remember, as I have said a few times, I'm going to be using a lot of JQuery, and in order for us to use JQuery, you either have to include the JQuery source code in the same folder where you're, or somewhere on your local, and then give the appropriate path here, or you could do something which is more popular or more common, which is include a link or path to a jQuery CDN, right? Now, one of the most popular jQuery CDNs is Google, is hosted by Google. So I'm just going to do Google jQuery CDN. I'm going to type that, search for it. The very first search result points to the Google page that gives you the information. And they make it very convenient. All you have to do is basically copy the script tag here. Okay, copy this here and include it here in your head section, just like so. This was that easy. Okay, and hopefully you guys are already familiar with doing this. And now that we have included our jQuery CDN here, now we can add our script tag. Okay, and so I'll add my script tag, and within the opening script tag I have to add the type attribute text/JavaScript, and I will include the path to the my JavaScript file using the source attribute, and type in the name of the file, which is script.js. Okay, and so now we have built our reference to the CSS file and also to the JavaScript file. Okay, so let's now start coding or building out our actual HTML page, one element at a time. And again, we need to be recreating this, what I just discussed. All right, so first off, again, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just basically try to create this you see this big green box, this big green container type or so in the background. I'm just going to try to create this, right? Well, it is this big sort of container that will contain all of the stuff. It'll contain this white box, which we will add or build later, and within that white box is basically everything that you need for the app, right? Again, we know this. I'm just sort of saying this quickly to recall your memory. So let's just first create this large sort of the big container that will house everything, right? So for that, I'm going to be using an HTML section tag. Okay, now you can use any tag you like, all right, but a lot of people prefer to use div everywhere in the HTML. I frankly personally don't sort of like that. My thinking is that HTML offers so many different types of tags, so why not use them, right? So I'm going to be using a section tag. Again, this is a block level element, as you know, and so I've added it here to my HTML document. And let me now open up our index.html file to see how it looks. All right, so I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to open my index.html, and here I'm going to open it in Google Chrome, and it is blank, and that's okay, because that's exactly what it should be, right? Because remember, even though we've added a tag, section tag, we have not styled it, so it's invisible. And so everything is good so far. We don't expect to see anything. So let's style the section tag for now. I'm just going to go here, and I'm going to just use the tag name as the attribute selector, and here I'm going to style it. Now, as you may have seen from my previous video, whenever I add a new element in any HTML document, I always put a border so I know where it is actually getting positioned, so I can actually see it on the page. So I'm going to add a border here, which obviously I'm going to remove later, but for now I'm just going to add it now. Okay, and I'm going to give this a width of, let's say, I'm going to use 100%. Okay, and I'm going to give it a height of 100%. Okay, and so basically all I'm doing is my intent here is to give the styling that I've given here is to give it a border and a width and a height. So let's see if we can see it. I'm go back to my page, which is blank now, but let me refresh it. Okay, so we see something, right? We see a black line which is spread across the width of the browser, but this we don't see an actual we don't see the box we don't see that the box has any height, right? So what happened here, right? We did give it a height a property. Look, we gave it a height of 100%, but we're not seeing any height. We just see a thick horizontal line. Well, that's because whenever you give height in terms of percentages to an element, and if that element is empty, then height will not show. That's the default behavior. It'll show exactly as what it is. So if you have an empty element, and if you specify the height of that empty element in terms of percentages, you're going to see this. You're not going to see the height, right? In order to get over this situation, let's change the unit for the height. Let's make it 100 VH. VH, as you know, is viewport height units, or these are units in terms of the height of the viewport, and viewport is just your browser window that you can see on your desktop in your browser. That's known as viewport. Feel free to Google it if you don't understand this, but this is another units that you can use to give dimensions to any element in your HTML. So I just changed the unit for the height and made it 100 VH. Let me give it a background color as well. Let me call it green, something. How about I just gave it maybe I just give it a gray. All right, let me just give it a gray background color, and now let's see if we can see our box as we expect it to, right? We've given it a width of 100%, a height of 100 VH, so we should see a box. Let's see if we do it. I'm going to come here, refresh the page, and voila, we do see it. we now see our box, which is spreading pretty much across the whole length and width of the browser. So we are getting closer. But look what's happening here, right? Look, we are seeing this sort of very unexpected gap between the top edge of the box and the top edge of the browser. And we're seeing another unexpected sort of margin, a white space margin, whatever you want to call it, between the left edge of the box, the section element, and the left edge of the browser. Well, why is that happening? Well, we didn't specify any margin for our section, right? If you look at our CSS, we didn't specify any margin. So why do we see these spaces, these margins on the top and the left of our section element? Well, we see that because, as you may know, HTML, whenever you add an HTML element, it comes with a default sort of margin and padding. And that's why you see this. So in order to neutralize this, in order to get rid of this, we need to add some more code. And that code that we need to add is something like this. You basically choose every element and you say, hey, before every element and after every element, make padding as 0, make margin as 0, and also box sizing should be border box. Okay, now padding and margin being 0 is self-explanatory. What box sizing does is that it always preserves the dimensions of an element. So let's say you have an element and you give it some dimensions, whatever dimensions, right? And let's say within that element you add other elements, right? And those elements may have some whatever margin and padding, right? If you don't have box sizing applied to that element, then that element that contains the other elements, that dimensions may change depending upon how many elements you have inside it. But if you apply box sizing property, as I've done here, to the element, then no matter what you put in that element, its dimensions will always be preserved, right? That's generally the idea of box sizing. Again, I cannot go too deep into it, but feel free to Google it. But this is what you do in order to get rid of that unsightly, that weird white space. So let's see if it does that. I'm going to go to the page, I'm going to refresh it, and boom, it did it. Look, we no longer have the white space. Okay, so that's good. So now what do we do, right? Now what we're going to do is we are going to keep building. So now all I did is I said that I wanted to build the, this background, the big box, here it is dark greenish, sort of olive green. I've changed the color, I made it dark gray, but that's what we built. We built basically the whole big container that contains everything. So that's done. Now let's go after this white box. Let's build the white box. So for this, first obviously we'll need to go into our HTML, and within our section we will need to specify another HTML element. In this case, I'll use another HTML element known as article. Okay, and that will be the way we will create our white box. Now, one quick pointer to one of the requirements. If you remember, one of the requirements stated that there should be a wrapper container, a wrapper box that contains everything, and that box should have a specific ID, and the ID should be quote-box. Right? Hopefully you remember that, and if not, then my stating it right now jogs your memory. So what I'm trying to say is that this box that we are building, in order to create this white box, this article that we are using to create this white box, this article right here must have an ID of quote-box. All right, so let me put that here. Now, even though we've added an article within our section tags, we're not going to see anything on our page. Let's check it out really quickly. This is our HTML page. Once I refresh it, we don't see anything, right? And the reason should be obvious, because we haven't styled it. So let's start adding some styling to our newly added article element. So I'm going to go to my CSS file. I'm going to access it or select it using the ID quote-box. Okay. And I'm going to do some styling. So first off, as I mentioned before, as I mentioned a few times in this video and my other videos, I always like to, whenever I add a new HTML element to a page, I always like to give it a border to see how it is shaping up, where it is actually getting positioned. So let me do that here. Simple 1px border. I'm going to also add some dimensions. I'm going to give it some width and height, obviously, so as to be able to see it. So let me give it a width of 90%. You know what? Actually, let me start giving dimensions in terms of what I prefer, which is to give dimensions in terms of REM units. As you know, REM stands for root EM. Sorry, not room EM, root EM units. EM is a unit that is used in the world of typography. Okay. And that is something that I have no idea what it is. All I know is that typography is a domain that deals with the styling and the look and feel and the styling of fonts. So all the fonts that you see out there in the world, you know, your fonts in your Microsoft applications and Google fonts, they are all basically created by people who are very well versed with this world, this domain of typography. And that's all I'm going to say about it. So I prefer to use REM units, so I'm going to use them. I just, this is just notes that I wrote to explain while I was talking. And in order to use REM units, one key requirement is that you must specify a default font size. You must specify a font size for the entire HTML document, or the root, which is the HTML document, right? So without doing that, you will not be able to use REM units, right? So let's specify a font size for the root, and by root it means the HTML element or the entire HTML document. So I'm going to select HTML document. I'm going to give it a font size of 16 pixel. I prefer that. You can use any size, but generally most people use 16 pixels whenever they specify a font size for HTML. So that's what I'm using. Let me also take this opportunity to specify a font family, because I want to be using the same, I would like to use the same font type for the entire HTML document that we are creating. And so let me just specify it right here. I'm just going to choose, I'm just going to choose this. Anything that comes up, you can choose something else if you like. It's just a matter of personal taste. I'm going to do that. So basically all I did was added an HTML, added a font size property and a font family property to my HTML document. Now we can go back to styling our article, that ID code-box. So I'm going to give it a width of, I don't know, let's say 40 rem. Okay, I'm going to give it a height of, let's say 10 rem. Okay, and I'm going to also give it, I'm going to need to give it a background color of white, because our box, as you can see from our mockup, is white background. If you don't give it a background of white, it won't show. It will merge with the background of the of the section, which is dark gray. So all right, background, I think I misspelled it, and yep, that takes care of it. All right, now let's see how whether our article shows up. So I'm going to go to our HTML page, refresh it. All right, it does show up. All right, so we do see a white box. Now clearly it should not be in the top left corner. It should be somewhere in the middle here. It should not be here, right? It should be somewhere in the middle, but we have to obviously apply some more styling. But in terms of the width and height, for now, yeah, maybe more or less they look okay. If you compare it to our mockup, we notice that the width is a little bit smaller. So let me do that, right? Let me adjust the width, because at the end of the day, we're trying to match our mockup. So let me adjust the width so that this is a bit longer than what we see in the mockup. So I'm just going to make the width, I don't know, let's make it 34 rem. All right, and that should reduce the width. And now what do we do? So what do we do in order to put it in the center? Right, one quick way to put anything in the center of another element, right, of the parent element, which in this case is a section tag, is to use the flex property, right? So in other words, if we declare this gray box as flex, then we can use the justify content and align items property of flex to quickly and nicely and neatly put this white box in the center. Let's do that. So again, the white box, this article, as you can see, this article is inside the section tags. So we're going to declare the section tag as a flex by using display property. Okay, and we're going to say justify content center. We're going to also use align items center. And now I think our box should be right in the middle. I'm going to the page, refreshing it, and there you go. It's placed nicely and neatly in the middle of the HTML page, right? I'm going to do a couple more things now that our box has a white border, it has a white background. We don't need to put a border, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm also going to give it some rounded corners. So let me do that really quickly. So let me get rid of the border here. Again, the background is different than the background of the container, so I don't need a border for this to show up. All I gotta do is give it a let's say a 4px radius, and this should take care of the rounded corners, and it does. Now we have a box which is right in the center. It has rounded corners, so we are making progress in the right direction. Now remember, we gave it a fixed width and a fixed height. We may have to revisit the height, because remember, our content inside the box will not be of the same amount, right? Just food for thought. Just keep this in mind. The code that we're going to show, that we're going to have to display, can vary in how many sentences, how many lines it occupies, right? So using a fixed height might be a little problematic. I don't know. Let's see how it pans out, right? But just keep that sort of thought in your mind for now. All right. So now what do we do next, right? Let's now try to build our next set of elements inside the white box. So what do we have inside the white box, right? We have this opening left quote, and we have some text for the quote, right? So let's try to get that in here. So I'm going to go to my HTML. So in order for me to basically have this, in order for me to create this, right? Again, I need a left quote, opening left quote, and some text, right? Now this opening left quote is a icon, right? And I'm going to show you what icons I'm using. I'm basically using FontAwesome, but this is an icon that I'm using. So the way I'm going to create this layout for this left quote and this text is that I'm going to put this left quote inside a span element. As you know, HTML has a span element, which is an inline element, and I'm going to put this text inside a p element. All right, so that's what I'm going to do here. All right, so let me go to my HTML and let me do this. What I'm going to do is, let me first create a span element. Okay, and it is inside the span element that I want to put my code, right? So let me walk you through how what I use to create this opening left quote. Once again, this is an icon, and specifically this is a FontAwesome icon. So FontAwesome is as you may know, is one of the largest icon repositories in the world. It's very popular. They have a whole bunch of stuff in there. Most people I know use FontAwesome. So the way you go to FontAwesome is you go to fontawesome.com, type that in your browser address bar. It'll take you to the FontAwesome page. Now, once you are on the page, you have to, you can go for two types of plans. One is a free plan that that most people use, that I'm using. The other is a paid plan. So up to you which one you want to use. But if you do use the free plan, you have to go scroll down the page. You have to click on this button, start for free. And once you click on the button, you will come to this page where you have to enter your email address. Okay, you enter your email address, and once you enter the email address and head the code send skit code, they will email you basically a script tag. That is what they mean by a kit code, right? They will basically email you a script tag. Then you will take that script tag and you will place it in the head section of your HTML. So you will, whatever script tag you get in your email, once you've signed up in this manner, you will take that script tag, you will go to your HTML and you'll place that script tag somewhere in your head section, right? Now, I have my own script tag that I used, since I already signed up for FontAwesome, months ago, years ago, whatever. So I'm going to use that, but I would urge you to get your own, because again, it's available for free, and you don't have to, you can use and get access to lots of free icons. That's the other good part of FontAwesome. Even with their free plan, they allow you access to, they're very generous. They have lots and lots of icons that they allow you to access. So as I said, I'm going to use my script tag here. I have my own FontAwesome script tag, so I'm going to copy that here, and I'm going to put it inside my head section like so. All right. So now with that, I need this specific icon. This icon from FontAwesome is called, I believe it's called left quote. So I'm just going to type in my browser FontAwesome left quote and see what comes up. I think the first link basically, yeah, quote left, that's the actual name. You go into quote left, and that will be the icon that I have used here. So once the page comes up, you should be able to see, and it's taking a minute to come up, and yep, there it is. Far quote left. So FontAwesome, when you want to use their icons, you have to basically use the I tag related to that icon. That's how they supply their icon. That's how they build their icons, is that they have a specific tag called I tag. All you have to do is copy this, okay, and you come into your HTML, and like I said, I'm going to put it inside my span tag. So here it is. All right. So I have now successfully added my FontAwesome this FontAwesome icon, right? This one, this opening left quote, I have successfully added that to my HTML document, right? We'll check it out in a minute. And one more quick note, the FontAwesome guys, the team, they basically differentiate each of their icon. They have thousands of icons in there, maybe more. They're differentiated using this class attribute, right? So every icon will have a different class attribute text, just an FYI. All right, so we've added our left quote here. Let me now add the text. As you may know from our when we reviewed the requirements, the text, the quote must be inside an element which has a ID of text. So I'm going to choose a P element. You can choose any other element, but I'm just choosing P because it makes sense to add. We're adding text. It, you know, to me it makes most sense to use a P element, and this element must have an ID of text. Okay, so we have that. And in here, I will add some text. Now, you may have heard of lorem ipsum text. I'm just going to grab some lorem ipsum. I don't have an actual quote at this point. We're going to do that as we build our app, you know, a little bit more. But for now, let me just grab some, you know, lorem ipsum code right here. So I go to loremipsum.io, come down here. I can just basically copy, you know, I can just basically copy as many lines as I like. I'm copying about 5 lines. I'm going to come back into my HTML and I'm going to add them here, right? Now let me just make sure that I can see all that. So let me bring down all the stuff here. Okay, so I have added now basically my I tag for the left quote inside my span element. And I've also added some random text inside a P element. Now let's go to our HTML page and see how it looks. I'm going to go to my page, I'm going to refresh it, and let's see what comes up. It is still loading. It's still loading, and look there, look at it, look right there. We have both the elements that we've added, right? We have our left quote, right? And we also have our lorem ipsum text that we are basically using as a stand-in, as some dummy text for our code. Obviously later we're going to put some real quotes here, right? So far the code that we've added is showing up. Let me just close this tab here because it's taking up some processing from my laptop. All right, so we have our 2 elements showing up, the 2 things we added, the left quote icon and the text showing up. Now obviously we have to style it, so we can do that now. Now one thing you should notice is that in our mockup, the left quote, this icon and the text, they are nicely sort of spaced from the left and right edge of the white box and also from the top edge of the white box, right? They have some nice healthy spacing from, you know, the left and right edge and the top edge and the top edge of the white box. So how can we do that? If you look at our page, yes, we do have the icon and the text, but they are basically sticking to the left and right edge of the white box and also sticking to the top, right? So we have to adjust that. But before we adjust that, we also should notice one thing, which is that the quote and the text are on different lines. Okay, they should be on the same line. They should not be starting on different lines. Now the reason we are seeing our this text, this quote text, this random text show up in a different line is because we added this text inside a P element right here. Okay, and P element is a block level HTML element, and as you know, all block level HTML elements start or need to start on their own line. So that is why our symbol, our quote symbol, our icon and our text is showing up in 2 different lines. Clearly that's not the way we want it. We want the icon and the text to show up on the same line. So how do we do that? Well, we can make a simple change. We can just make the P element that we added, we can make that an inline element, and that should work. So let me pull up or select the P element using its ID text, and let me first make it inline, display inline. Okay, and let's see what we get. I refresh the page, and there you go. Now we are one step closer. Now our quote, left quote icon and our text is starting on the same line. So this is good. the next thing that I had mentioned is that they are using up the entire space. Clearly we don't, that's not what we need. We need the symbol, the icon, and the text should be they should have some nice healthy distance from the left and right edge of the white box and also from the top edge. Well, how do we do that? Well, one way we can do that is we can put both of these things inside another element, like a div element, and then size that div element to generate this distance between the left and right sides, okay, and the distance from the top edge of the white box. So let's do that. So what I'm saying is that I'm going to put these two elements, right, the span and the p element, I'm going to put it inside another HTML element. So I'll say, I'll call it I don't know, I'll just call it div. All right, let me call it div element, and I'm going to take this here. I'm going to basically put it here. All right, and I'm going to indent this accordingly so that it is obvious looking at the HTML document that the span and the p element are now nested inside the div element. All right, now let me give this div element an ID. In order to be able to style it, let me give it an element of div1. Okay, now let me style the div element. Obviously we're not going to see the div element because we haven't styled it, as you know. So let me style the div element a little bit. As I mentioned to you before, I always like to start with giving it a border. So I'm just giving it a quick border here. All right, a border, somehow I can't spell border now. All right, so 1px solid red. All right, now let's see what we have here. So I'm going to refresh the page, and look, we do see the two elements, the icon and the text, inside a red box. That red box is our div with ID div1, right? Now, as I said, the reason I put these two elements inside a div is so that I can use the div to produce that the spacing, the right and left spacing for the paragraph and the quote sign, right? So basically what I'm saying is I'm going to give this div a dimension. I'm going to give it a width of let's say, I don't know, let me start let me just give it a width of, I don't know, percentage wise. In this case I'll use percentages because it's easier, because remember, the reason I'm using percentages here and not rem is because this div1 is inside the code box, and the code box already has a fixed width. So by giving this any nested element, if I give it a width in terms of percentages, that will also remain fixed because the parent of div1 is code box, and code box has a fixed width. So it's just basic math. If that is fixed, a percentage will also remain fixed. So I'm going to give it a percentage of 86%, right? And let's see how it looks now. All right, so we do have a space that was created, but it was created all along the right hand side. Now obviously we will need to fix that, but let's put it aside for now. I'm going to fix that in a minute, but let's put that aside for now. All right, so as of now we have made some progress. We have added our quote, the left quote, this icon, and the text to our white box. All right, so basically we have accomplished most of this, right? Obviously we have to adjust the spacing, and as I said, we'll do it as we add the other elements. Now let's turn our attention to the next element that we need to add. The next element that we need to add is this author text, right? So let's add that, right? And I'm going to add that in the same way that I added the span and the p element. I'm going to basically add that using a div just to keep it consistent, right? So I'm going to add a div. All right, and in the div I'm going to add a author text. First I'm going to add a dash. I'm going to add some name, John A. Smith. Okay, that's what I have added. All right, and I'm going to give this div an ID of, let's say, div2, because I will need to style it, right? I'm going to give an ID of div2 because right now you will see the addition of the text like so. So if I come in here, refresh the page, look, we do see the text that we added, John, the dash John A. period Smith, but obviously we need to adjust it. This is not the way this looks. This looks quite different. Again, if you look at the mockup, the name is almost all the way to the right. It has some good spacing above and below and to the right and left, and we're going to again add that in a minute. But for now we have our author name, some dummy author name show up in our HTML page. Okay, Now, as I said, I use the same approach. I put the text inside a div. So let me now style the div. So in this case, our div has got styling of has got an ID of div2. So I'm going to use it. I'm going to access it or select it using that its ID. I'm going to give it a border again, a 1px solid. Let's say I'm going to give a different border. Let's say blue. And I'm going to give it a width of, obviously I'm going to need to give it a same width, right? 86%, in order to make it consistent with the above content, right? If I give it a bigger width, it will look weird. So I have to give it a width which is the same as the width of the other div. Because remember, these are all child elements. The div1, the div2, they're all child elements of what? Of this article. So in order to generate or create a consistent look and feel, I hope you understand why we have to give it a width which is the same as the width of the other div. Now let's refresh the page and see what we see here. Okay, so we see the blue box, and as you can see, the blue box has the same width as the red box, which is exactly what we want. Now obviously I have to adjust it to make the name appear to the right. So let me do that. The quick way to do that is to basically say text align end. If I do that, it should move our author's name to the right, and it does, right? So again, one step closer. Now obviously, as I said before, the red and the blue box should not be touching the left edge of the white box. The red and the blue box must not be touching this. They must be, nicely centrally positioned within the white box, and we're going to deal with that in a few minutes, right? So now we have this. Now what else can be, is there any other styling that we can use here? Let me just make sure that we have this. No, I think we should be good here. We should be pretty good here. So let's do this now. All right. Instead of doing this, let's first adjust some font sizes, maybe in terms of for the font and the icon. What we can do is just do some quick styling. I want to just make the font size here. Again, we could have done this later, but since we are talking about these elements, it's probably good to do it right now. I'm just going to give it a font size of 1 rem for the code box, and I'm also and C. And I'm also going to give it a some actually I don't need to change the casing, the upper or lower case thing properties, because it's already there. So let's see how it looks. I just gave it a font size. Let's see if it increases it. Okay, it didn't do much, so let me give it a font size of you know what, we will worry about font sizes later. Let's just keep going to the next set of elements. So the next set of elements is we have to basically now put these 3 buttons, right? We have a Twitter button all the way to the left. We have a Tumblr button, which is right next to the Twitter button, and they are both in the shape of a square. And all the way to the right, we have a button which says new quote. Okay, so let's add these buttons. All right, so what I'm going to do is, obviously they are within the white box, so I have to add it. I have to add it here. All right, so I'm just going to add the buttons here. I'm going to start with the first Twitter button. So I'm going to type the boilerplate semantics for a button, which is you start with the button tag, you put the type attribute, which should also say button. Okay, and I'm going to what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this button for now, and let me copy this here. Let me create the next button and also the next button. All right, now we've added 3 buttons. Now clearly these 3 buttons need some more styling. Right now if I went to the page, I don't think I will see anything. Let me make sure. No, obviously, because we have not added any styling. Now, as I said, the first button is a Twitter button, so I need to add a nice Twitter icon. Okay, and that I can do. Again, we can go to FontAwesome, and I can say FontAwesome Twitter icon. Right? If I do that, I get the search results. The very first search result takes you to the Twitter icon page, and once it loads, all you have to do is basically copy this, just like I did when I added my left code icon. All I have to do is copy this, come here, and I'm going to put this icon here. I'll copy within the first button. Let me do the same and add the Tumblr icon. Okay, and right here, the very first search result takes me, or will take me to the Tumblr icon page, I think. And yep, there it is. All I do is copy this and bring it into my HTML and put my Tumblr icon inside the button like so. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that the requirements did not specify anything about a Tumblr icon. You're absolutely right. This is just an additional stuff I'm adding based on some mockup that I saw. It just, gives you a little more variation and a better idea of how to add two buttons side to side, side by side, right? And so it will be you learn a little bit more. That's what I'm trying to say. That's why I keep adding a few things to the requirements, just to be able to code and a little bit more, and hopefully help you understand how, gain some additional knowledge, right? So now we have added our two buttons, all right? So let's see how it looks. I'm going to go to my page, and there you go. Our Twitter and our Tumblr icons are showing up. Now, obviously, they are not, they are very small. They're all the way to the left, and we have to worry about all that. We have to fix all that. But at least these two icons are actually showing up. All right. So what do we do next? Let's give the button some styling. All right. Now, since I'm going to be styling the Twitter and the Tumblr icons the same way, basically I'm going to be styling them, the same look and feel. They are both square shaped. They have the same type of rounded corners, right? They have the same dimensions. I don't need to give it ID. I can make it simpler. I can give it a class, right? And let's say I'm going to give it a social class to both of these, and I can use these to basically style. All right, I'm going to give it a social class, right, like so, right? And I'm going to style it using basically a social class. Now for this button, the third button, which has the lettering, or which has the text new quote, this button right here all the way to the right, as you may recall, this button has to have a specific ID. That ID is new dash quote. So I have to use that ID because it's in the requirements. So I'm going to use new dash quote. Now let's do some styling for the button. So I'm going to first style the button with the class social, the Twitter and Tumblr button. I'm going to access them, select them using the class. Whenever you select class, you have to use dot and the class name. So I'm going to give it a width of, I don't know, 2 rem, height of 2 rem, okay? And I'm going to give it a border of, well, I don't need to give it a border, it should already come with it. I'm going to give it a background color of, let's say I'm going to give it a background color of gray. I'm trying to match it with the background color that I gave to the section, which was gray, so I'm going to do the same. I could choose any other color, but just to keep it homogeneous, I'm going to give background color of gray. All right, and now let me just also style the new quote, the other button, which has the ID new dash quote. Okay, and this I'm going to basically give it a width of, let's say 6 rem. I misspelled width, let me correct that, 6 rem. And I'm going to give it a height of 2 rem, because again the height of all three buttons is the same. I'm going to give it a height of 2 rem. I'm going to also give it a background color of gray. Okay, now one thing I need to do is I need to add the text to this button called new quote, right? That's what it says. As you know, in the mockup it says new quote. If you look at the mockup right here, it says new quote, so I'm going to obviously need to add that. All right, and so let's see how it looks. We've done some styling. Let me reload the page. Okay, so we do have some changes, right? Our buttons are bigger, right? And it's all, all the stuff is actually showing up, but clearly we have to do a lot of work to make them appropriately spaced. Remember, the Twitter and Tumblr buttons are close to each other, right? And the new quote button is all the way to the right, so we have to deal with that, right? But before we do that, let me just make these icons a little bit bigger, right? And let me also make this text a little bit bigger. So in order to make the icons a little bit bigger, I can just use the I tag. I can use the I tag here. I selected using the tag name, and I'm going to, the way you change the size of the icons is use the font size property. So I'm going to give it 1.1 rem. Right, and remember, since I'm using itag, it'll affect all three icons. It'll not only affect the Twitter and Tumblr, it'll also affect this, the left quote, right? Because I would also like that to be slightly bigger. If I wanted to just change the font size of Twitter and Tumblr, I would need to use their class. I would need to use the class names within their itag. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right. So right now I've increased the font size of all three icons. So let's see if it works, if it increases their size, and it does, right? The Twitter and Tumblr icons became slightly bigger. Let me do it in a little bigger, just a personal matter of personal taste. I made it 1.2 rem, and it should become bigger, and it does. So Twitter and Tumblr icons and the left quote icon have now increased in size because I have applied the font size property to them. Okay, very good. Now what do I need to do? I also want to increase the font size of the new quote, right? So let me go in here, and I'm going to go into new quote. I'm going to use font size as 1.2 rem. Let's see how it looks. Okay, it looks definitely weird because it takes two lines. We cannot have that. Font size must be the same line. So let me just make it 1 rem and see if it brings it back to the original size. Yeah, I think it's good. It looks pretty good. I think I'm fine with this. All right. But now look at this. What we have is we have to adjust the spacing. Right? Now, how do we do that? One way to do that would be to basically put these two icons, the social icons, the Twitter and Tumblr buttons, not icons, excuse me. One way to create this spacing that we have here, which is the Twitter and Tumblr are together on the left hand side of the white box, and this new quote button is on the right hand side. One way to do that would be to put these two buttons, right, the Twitter and the Tumblr buttons inside a div, another element like a div, and put this another element like a div, and then put all of this inside another div and use the flex property. Right? Clearly, some of you may not follow what I just said. So let me actually do it and show it to you. Right? So what I'm saying is that I'm going to put these two buttons inside a div. Okay. So let me do that. So I'm going to open a div here, and I'm going to put the Twitter and Tumblr button inside a div. Okay, and you will see why that will help. All right, I'm also in order to maintain consistency, I will also need to put the new quote button inside the div. Remember, button is an inline element, so if you just do this, the new quote button will move to the next line like so. Look what happened. Right? Just as I said, the new quote button moved to the next line. Why it did that? Because we have put the Twitter and the Tumblr buttons inside a div, and div is a block level element. So a block level element occupies the whole space. It takes its own line. It does not allow any other element to coexist on the same line. That is why it pushed the new quote button to the next line. And again, any button in HTML is an inline element. It can exist on the same line, but if that line already has a block level element, it will be pushed to the next line. So if you want to further see what I'm talking about here, let me do this. All right, let me so you hopefully you understand. If you wanted to do a quick thing, I could just give it an ID, and I could just give it a temporary ID. I could say it temp div or something like that, and I could give it a quick style here. I could just give it a border. Okay, and you will see what I'm talking about. Solid 1 pixel, solid blue, and now you will see that this div occupies the whole line like so. Right? So now you know why this new quote button moved to the next line, because I have placed the Twitter and Tumblr button inside a div, and div by default takes up a line all by itself. All right, so I don't need that, obviously. So you know what, let me just put it here for now, just in case, because we might need it to show something else. I might need to show something else. So in other words, how do I get this new quote button back on this line? Well, there's two things I can do. I could basically, what I could do is I could put this inside its own div, right? And then put both the divs inside another div which I could declare as a flex. So let me do that now. All right, let me put this button inside a div. Okay. All right. And now what we've done is we have two divs. We have this div and we have this div. All right. If I put both these divs inside another div and declare that div to be a flex, I will have my spacing, all my spacing needs met. I will be able to create this look and feel for the three buttons. So let's do that now. Right. Obviously, there are other ways to do it, right? You could declare both these divs as inline. So, you could declare the temp div as inline and you could give it a smaller width, and you could declare this div also an inline, but that would be requiring more CSS writing. A better way to achieve spacing is using Flexbox. Right, so let's do that. So I'm gonna give it a div here. I'm just gonna call this div. I'm gonna give this div. I'm gonna like I said, I'm going to use this div to encapsulate all of this stuff, right? So now let me move all this stuff inside and give it an indentation. So now look what happens. Now we have a div. This div, right? This div contains two divs, this guy and this guy. And obviously the first two buttons are in temp div, and the new code button is in this div. Now, why did I do all that? I did all that because I want to basically use Flexbox or flex property to achieve what I want to achieve, which is just a flex, the spacing. So let me now give this div. I want to style this, right? So let me give it an ID of I don't know. Let me just give it a button container. Let's say button container. Okay, and let me give this div some styling. So I'm going to access it here. Button container. Okay. Now, as always, I'm going to give it a border of 1px solid. Let's give it green. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to use flex property. So let me give it display flex. I want to turn this container, button container, into flex. Now, in this flex, what we need is we want to be able to create the spacing, right? So let's first see how it looks. So I just give it a flex property. Let me give it justify content center and align item center. This is standard most of the time when you use flex. You use justify content and align items property because to produce a nice centrally positioned look and feel. So let's see how it looks right now. All right, so we have all three buttons showing up on the same line. Now that is good. That is definitely good news, but they should not be showing up like this, like stuck to each other in the middle. That can be adjusted using a couple of things, right? So first we need to change the justify content property from center to space between. Okay, that will take care of that. Also, we need to give the button container div. Remember, the button container div is at the same level as this div and this div. So the button container div, actually I could have called it div 3. Let me do that to avoid confusion. Let me do that. Let me just call it div 3 here. Okay, and let me call it div 3 here to avoid confusion here. So now you know what I'm talking about. Let me change this to div 3. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that div 1, div 2, div 1, div 2 and div 3, they are at the same level. They're all children of this article element, right? Now, since we have given div 1 and div 2 this a width of 86%, we also have to give this div 3 a width of the same amount, right? Otherwise it will look weird. So let me first do that. 86%. Okay, so now you will notice what's going to happen is it's going to adjust and now look what it did. Now we have our buttons basically almost looking like they need to look like. All right, we have the Twitter and Tumblr button to the left hand side, and we have the new code button to the right hand side. Now clearly, as I said before, our elements inside the white box should be centrally placed. They should not be all the way to the left. So let's adjust that first and then turn our attention to other styling. Okay, so what if how do we get all these elements inside the white box centrally positioned, right, so that they have some equal spacing from the left and the right and from the top as well. Let's deal with the left and right spacing. So the way we can do that is we can take the parent container, which is this article, which is this code box, and declare that as a flex box. If we declare that as a flex box, as we have done, right, we take advantage of flex properties to basically align it nicely. Now in this case, the flex box, the elements, the div1, div2 and div3, these elements which are children of the white box, right, we are declaring the white box as a flex. Now these children appear along the column, so we have to give it another property of flex direction of column, right, because it is along the column that we have to create the alignments, right? And now we can give justify content as space around and align items as center, and it is the align items property that will make it in the middle. Now if you don't believe me, let me show you. I'm commenting out align items property. Okay, in fact, let me not comment it out. Let me just delete it. Okay, all I did was added a flex direction and justify content property, and I'm saying that it will not have much of an impact. All right, so oh, I need to put a closing braces. Okay, let's see here. Would it have an impact? No, it didn't have any impact at all. Well, a little bit. You see some spacing creep up between the boxes, some vertical spacing, right? So it did have some impact, right? We have some vertical spacing that crept in, that is now present. That is coming from this justify content space around property, right? But our boxes are still to the left. We want them to be in the middle. How do we do that? We add align item center. And now you should notice, that these boxes come in the center. There you go. Now you see these boxes are along the center. All right, so we are getting closer to our mockup. Now clearly there's some more work to be done, so let's do that. So the first thing I want you to recognize, another thing that I want you to recognize is that look at this box. They look so crowded, right? We have a quote, we have some dummy text that is taking up 5 lines, and that is why it is using all the space. But if you look at our mockup, no matter how big the quote is, it should always maintain some healthy vertical spacing along between these elements. So between the quote text and the author text and the buttons, there should always be some healthy spacing. Now you might say, well, there's just 2 lines here. So obviously we are seeing the spacing in this mockup, right? And you may say, well, here there's 5 lines. So clearly those extra lines are using up the space. Well, you're right that there are 5 lines. But even if there are 5 lines, our white box should be able to adjust its height in order to allow the same internal spacing among these elements, right? In other words, it should not matter how many lines the quote occupies. If it occupies 1 or 2 lines, yeah, and the spacing exists, great. But if a quote occupies 4 lines, 5 lines, because again, you don't know what kind of quote you're going to get. There is no restriction. Some quotes are like 5 words, but some quotes are long. Some quotes can take 5 lines. So your page, your element should be smart enough to be able to allow for this healthy vertical spacing no matter how many lines the quote takes, right? This vertical healthy spacing between the quote text and the author text and the button should always be maintained. Well, how do you do that? One way to achieve that is to use the min height property. So the white box, in our case, that is the housing that contains all these elements, we have given it a fixed height, right? Look at the white box, the white box which has the ID code dash box. Look at the height we've given it. We've given the height of 10 rem. So no matter how much content you put in there, it will always be 10 rem. If you wanna check it out, let me add some more lines here. Let me go to my HTML page. Let me copy and duplicate this, all right, just to show you how crowded it's going to become. Okay, And look, now I've doubled the number of dummy lines, right? Now look what it does to our page. Look, it completely destroys the page, right? Our page is looking so messed up. See, everything is now spilling over. The quote is going above the box. The buttons are going below the box. That cannot be, right? Once again, our box, white box, should be smart enough that no matter how many lines the quote inside the box takes, no matter how big the content inside the white box is, our white box should be smart enough to adjust its height and be able to maintain the same look and feel, consistent spacing, vertical and horizontal spacing, right? That's the mark of a good, well-designed page. So how do we achieve that? Well, we can achieve that using, as I said, a min height property. So instead of giving our white box, again, the white box has the ID quote dash box. Instead of giving it a fixed height, let's just give it a min height. And let's just give it a min height of auto. Okay. When you do that, let's see what it does. What I expect now that I've given the white box a min height of auto, I expect that all the content should go back inside the white box. Let's see if it does it. And boom, look, that's exactly what happened. All the content went back inside the white box. Why? Because now we are saying, hey, Mr. White Box, you got to have a minimum height of auto, meaning have exactly the same height as much height as you need to fit whatever content is in there. So the height of the white box will keep adjusting according to content. So that's a big important change. Hopefully you see how I work that into the code. One quick note, I try to make these videos because I want to share or want to highlight how a developer should think, right? It is very rare for a developer to basically start knowing these things right when he or she starts writing the code, right? So in other words, I could have used the min height property when I was writing the CSS. But if I had done that, you probably would not have understood why I'm using min height instead of a regular height property. So I intentionally gave it a height property so that I could demonstrate that, hey, when you give it a height property, you get a fixed height. If you want flexible height, you need to choose min height, right? So hopefully that helped. All right, so now we have a white box that basically will expand and contract vertically depending on its content. That means the content, no matter how big or small it is, it will always be inside the white box, right? But let's change our attention to another aspect. Look at our mockup, right? Our content in the white box has a good spacing from the top and bottom edge of the white box. And it also has a healthy spacing amongst each other, right? So let's try to do that. How can we do that? Well, one way to do that would be to basically give some margins between these three boxes. Give some margin between div 1, div 2, and div 3. Because remember, all the content inside the white box is inside these three divs. So let's do that. Let's give some margin. So I'm going to start with div 1. I'm going to go to div 1. I'm going to give it some margin. And I don't need to give left and right margin because remember, our left and right margin is already there, right? So I'm going to give it a top and bottom margin. So the way to do that is I'm going to say top 1.5 rem and right and left margin of 0. So if you use a two value property, if you use two values in the margin property, the first value applies to the top and bottom and the second value applies to the right and left. You know what? Let me use all four values to make it better. So I want to give a top margin of 1.5 rem. I want to give a right margin of 0. I want to give it a bottom margin of 0.5 rem. And I'm going to give it a left margin of 0. Okay. Now let's see if our top, again, I gave these margins to div 1, which is the topmost div, right? Which is the red box. Let's see if the red box gets some spaces above and below. And it does. Look, the red box has some nice space above and some below. Let me increase the space below as well, make it 1 rem. Okay. All right, and you can choose whatever space you want. I'm choosing something that appeals to my aesthetic. Let's do the same with div 2. Now what we want to do is we want to give some space to div 2, give some margins or some vertical space for div 2, meaning the blue box. Okay, so let me go to div 2 and again I'll use the margin property and I'll use four values. So I'm going to give 1 rem for top, I'm going to use 0 for right because I don't need to give any margin on the right and left side. The right and left are the boxes are positioned centrally horizontally, so I don't need to give any margins on the right and left. But bottom I need to give, I don't know, let's just give 1 rem, and left is 0 again. Now let's see what we should see. Well, we should see some more vertical space around the blue box. Let's see that. And there you go. Our blue box has some more vertical space. All right. Now, the last thing we want to do in terms of vertical spacing is, look, in our mockup, the button is not sticking to the bottom edge of the white box. If you look at our mockup, there is some nice spacing in the bottom of below the buttons. Let's achieve that. Let's try to do that. And again, all we need to do is go to our well, what div is that? I forgot. Should be div 3. Yep, div 3. I go to div 3 and I'll give it I'll just give it a bottom. You know what? Let me give it a top margin of 0.5 rem. Right 0. Bottom is 1.5 rem and left 0. And let's see what we get. Now, when I refresh the page, you should see some nice spacing above and below, some more spacing above the green box and some spacing up here below the green box. And there we have it. So now we have, you know, a good amount of spacing above and below all the 3 boxes, the red box, the blue box, and the green box. Now clearly you can play with it. So for example, I want to increase the spacing on top, so I could make it 2 rem and I could reduce this a little bit, I guess, but you can do that, you know, but I'm good with this, right? So now we are very close to our mockup, right? Now clearly we have to make some other things, some other minor adjustment, which I will show what it is. Those minor adjustments are basically, look at these buttons, right? These buttons have hard corners. I want to give some rounded corners. And also these buttons have this black edge. Do you see these black edges? That also we have to remove. But before we do that, let's get rid of our border for the red, blue and green boxes. We don't need them anymore. As I told you, I use them to see initially how they are getting placed and how they are shaping up. So I'm going to get rid of this border for div 1, for div 2, okay, and also for div 3, okay. And what I said, I want to also give the buttons a nice border radius, you know, a rounded corner. So I'm just gonna, since I'm going to give all buttons a rounded corner, I could go into, you know, I could go into social here and do that, right? And I would also have to do that again for the new code button, right? Or I could just use button. I could just do button here, and I could do it once, just one line of code. Border radius is 3 pixels. Okay, let's see if it changes anything, and it does. All right, it does. So now our buttons have nice rounded corners. Now another minor thing that is bothering me a little bit is that these 2 buttons, the Twitter and the Tumblr buttons, are very close to each other, right? I want to give it some more spacing. All right, so how do we do that? Now, as you know, I have placed the Twitter and the Tumblr button inside a div. Do you see this blue container? Hopefully you can see it. Well, this is the div that houses the Twitter and the Tumblr button. Okay, so if I increase the width of this div, they should get some more space. Let's see if it does that. I'm going to go to that div, and remember that div is called temp div, right? It is this div that contains both the buttons, the Twitter and the Tumblr button. So I'm going to go to temp div. I'm going to give it a width of let's say, I don't know, 12 rem. Let's see what it does. Okay, I'm going to give it a width of 12 rem. Oh, that is too big. Let me make it a little bit less. Let me make it 7 rem. Let's see if that is slightly narrower. That's still too big. Let me make it 5 rem. Again, sometimes when you do styling, you have to play with it a little bit. All right, that's better. Now, so now I have increased the width of the blue box, which contains the Twitter and the Tumblr button. But the buttons still have the same level of spacing between each other. How do I do that? Well, either I can add some padding, right? Or I can make the blue box a flex and use the justify content property to give it a nice healthy spacing. Let's do that. So I can declare the temp div as display flex, and I'm going to use justify content property as space between, And I think this should create further horizontal spacing between my Twitter and Tumblr button. Let's see if it does it. And it does. All right. So again, hopefully, I could have probably lived with the original spacing, but I wanted to show it again as a matter of, showing you how powerful Flexbox is, Flex property is, right? You can use it everywhere, and in a very convenient manner, you can generate spacing, vertical, horizontal spacing, wherever you need it, right? So I can live with this spacing between the Twitter and the Tumblr buttons. Now, if you want to reduce the spacing, all you have to do is go back in here and reduce the width of the temp div, the div that houses both the buttons. You can make it, let's say, 4.5 rem. All right, let me do that. And now these buttons should be horizontally closer. Okay, and they are, right? Let me just make it a little bit bigger, 4.6 maybe, so that I get slightly more distance. All right, I think I can live with this. Again, this was not needed from the perspective of requirements, but I like to draw whenever I'm creating pages. I like to make sure that I'm aesthetically it's pleasing to me. If you have a different aesthetic taste, absolutely feel free to style it differently. But the point of the matter is that now our buttons are all lining up. They're on the same line, right? One thing actually that I noticed is that if you notice earlier, the height of the quote button is very slightly smaller than the height of this button. That's because I think we gave the icons too much of a font size. So let me reduce the font size of the Twitter and Tumblr icons, right? So let me go to the I tag and make it 1.1. Again, this is something I'm doing to please my aesthetics, to make it according to my aesthetics. If you did nothing, you would still meet the requirements, right? Let me refresh it. And now these three buttons have this much closer to the same height. All right, now let me get rid of the border. There's two things I got to do now, right? To clean this button section up, I got to get rid of this border, this blue border. And I also want to make sure that if you notice, all the buttons have a weird sort of a black edge along the bottom and the right? You notice that, right? There's a black edge on the bottom and on the bottom and the right, on the right and the bottom, on the right and the bottom. So the reason for that, I believe, is that there is a border property that we have to make it none. If we did that, we should be able to remove that, right? So first I'm going to give it a border of none to the buttons. Okay, and let's see if it does it. I'm going to refresh the page, and you should notice the blackness, this thick black line on the bottom and the right of all three buttons should disappear. And it does. So that's what was creating that sort of unsightly, that sort of slightly ugly black thing on the bottom and the right of each of the button. That took care of it. Let me get rid of the blue box. I'm going to go to temp div, remove the border. Okay, I'm going to remove the border here. All right, and now let's see how it looks. All right, this is now looking exactly like our mockup. Obviously, right, there's a different color scheme here. That's okay, but our mockup now is we have successfully recreated the look and feel of the mockup in our page. Now, as I said, right, our code, if it's shorter, let's see what happens if the box height adjusts automatically or not. So I'm going to go back into my HTML document. I'm going to remove the 2 lines I added here. Okay, and now let's see what happens to the box. What I expect of the box is it should shrink, its height should shrink to accommodate the reduced content. And look, it does, right? It not only shrinks, but it is maintaining its vertical spacing from the top and bottom edge of the white box, and is also maintaining the spacing among the elements between the quote and the author and the buttons. All right, so we have successfully created our mockup. All right, so this is a good accomplishment, and now we're going to move on to the next step, which is try to code our JavaScript in jQuery. Now, before we get into coding the app using jQuery JavaScript, there are a couple of requirements that we have forgotten to address with regard to our HTML. So let's do that now. The first requirement is around the Twitter button. As you may recall, one of the requirements clearly states that when user clicks the Twitter button, it should take the user to a twitter.com page. In fact, they do provide a URL. So let's address this requirement first. One of the best ways, one of the most effective ways to turn a button into a link is to surround the button or place the button inside an HTML A tag, like so. So I'm just going to place the button inside an HTML A tag. So I'm going to take the closing tags for the A tag and I'm going to put it at the end of the button. All right, like so. So now our button is encapsulated within A tags. Now obviously that's not enough. We have to provide on the A tag, we have to add the href attribute on the A tag, which should point to the twitter.com webpage. Okay, without having an href attribute, the A tag will be meaningless and it will not take the user to the twitter.com page, as you hopefully know. So we have to provide an href attribute in the A tag for the button when it is clicked to actually go and navigate to the twitter.com page. So I'm doing that now. The address I believe is twitter.com/intent/Twitter or tweet. Okay, so let's see if this works. So I'm going to go to our page, I'm going to refresh it or re-upload it so that the new code sticks, and I'm going to click the Twitter button. And voila, it does take you to the twitter.com page. Now you may have noticed that it basically opened the page on the same, it basically opened the URL, the twitter.com URL, on the same page that the app was, right? Wouldn't it be nice if it opened the twitter.com URL on a new page, right? I think it would be great so that our, the app page remains and the twitter.com page is open in a new tab, so so that you don't have to press this back button to go back to the app. Now the way you can achieve that is you basically add another attribute within the opening A tag. That attribute is target and equals, within quotes, underscore blank. If you do this, right, you should see the page opening. In fact, I made a mistake here. I need to put an ending quote here, and yep, this works better. Now when we go back to our page and when we refresh it, and now when we click on our Twitter button, it should open that twitter.com page in a new tab. So let's check it out, and it does. Look, it opened it on a separate tab. Our app is still visible, on this tab, and the twitter.com page is, it opened on a new tab. So that to me works better, and hopefully this also allows you to see how do you open a page on a new tab. You basically give the href attribute. I just closed the twitter.com page. Now let me do the same for the Tumblr button. Now obviously, as I have said a few times, there are no requirements that need to be met, but regarding the Tumblr button, this was an extra button that I put, but since we have it here, let's just add a little more polish to it. So I'm going to also basically make sure that then the Tumblr button is clicked, it opens up the tumblr.com page in a new tab. So the way you do that is the same way. You add the A tag here, you take the closing A tag and you put it at the end of the button. Okay, and within the opening A tag you add an href attribute, which should be https, if I remember correctly, tumblr.com. okay, and in order for the page to be opened on a new tab, I'm going to add a target attribute and set it to underscore blank. Now with this, when we click on the Tumblr button, it should also open up the tumblr.com page in a new tab. So let's do it. I clicked on it and there you go. Now we have tumblr.com page on a new tab. All right, very good. So the final HTML related requirement that we need to meet is, if you recall, the ID of this element that houses that shows or that displays the author name. The ID of that needs to be author, right? We gave it an ID of div3. That is not as per the requirements. The requirements state that we need to give this well, not this one, excuse me, not div3, I beg your pardon. This is the div that we need to change the ID. Once again, the requirement states that the author name should be displayed inside an element whose ID needs to be author. Okay, so that's the ID we have to give. Now, since we changed the ID from div2 to author, obviously we have to replace div2 in the style sheet with author. So wherever we see div2 in style sheet, we have to replace it with author. So I think this is the only place we have div2. So I'm going to replace it with author, and this way we are not going to see any changes. So I go to this page, I refresh it, and everything is just as it should be, as it was, right? All right. Now there is one more thing. Let me just quickly check if there are any other div2. There should not be, but just as a matter of double checking. All right. So we made the change. There was only one instance of the div2 as we expected, and we changed that to author. So we're good. There is just one more minor sort of polish type, finesse type change that I want to propose here. So if you look at our button, right, when you hover over it, there is no hover over behavior. The buttons remain the same. How about if we, if we added some hover behavior? And the hover behavior that I would like to add is that whenever you hover over these buttons, it should become lighter. So it should maintain whatever color it has. It should still preserve the background color that the button has, but it should become a bit lighter, right? This is a very interesting sort of CSS trick that I learned. That's why I wanted to share it with you. So one way to do that would be you basically select the button and you apply to it on a hover property. Okay, and here you will say use a the property name is filter. All right, and as you can see, I have the appropriate extensions in my VS Code. So the actual thing that you have to use is brightness, and give it, let's say, 90%. Okay, and now with this change, you will notice that when you hover over the buttons, it should become lighter in color. So let's try it. So here it is. Okay, that is interesting. Nothing is happening. Okay, so I think I may have oh, I misspelled button. That's, that I don't know why I did that. I'm pretty sure button is a pretty easy word to spell, but anyways, I have corrected the spelling. And now let me go back to our HTML page, refresh it, and now when I hover over it, and look, if you notice, it becomes darker. Excuse me, it becomes darker. Brightness is, I lowered the brightness, I made it 90%, so it became darker. If you want to make it lighter, you have to make the brightness like something like 110%. Let's try that. Okay, and if you do that now, it'll become lighter. See, now it's becoming lighter. Okay, so it's up to you. I'd prefer to make it darker, so I'll keep it at 90%. Okay, or I could even do 90%. See, it sounds good. So when I go into the page, right, and if I hover over it, right, you see the color is getting darker. The background color of the button is getting a bit darker, and the same here. But how about we write some more code so that this change takes a couple of milliseconds? That way it becomes more emphatic, it becomes more visible, right? Right now when I hover over it, right, the color becomes darker pretty quickly. It's like, snaps to the darker color, and that's okay. But wouldn't it be nice if we added some sort of a delay, right, or some sort of a slow change of color? And the way to do that is you have a transition property, right? You apply the transition property to the button. So I will say transition, I will say all, I will say 0.3 seconds, and I will say linear. Okay, now these are some common values whenever you use transition. All I'm saying here is that, hey, for any change to the button, make sure that it is linear and takes 0.3 seconds. Okay, for any, and all stands for any kind of change. Well, in this case, the kind of change we have coded for is the hover change. So let's do that. Before I do that, I also want to change the cursor to pointer. So let me just do that. Cursor, pointer. Okay, this will change the cursor to a finger shaped icon, as you will see right now. This is again some extra changes that I'm doing so as to polish up our app a little bit, the look and feel of it. So now I have refreshed the page. Now notice when I hover over these buttons, you should see two changes. One, the cursor should change from arrow to a pointer, like a hand sign, and the color change should take place gradually. Let's do it. Okay, you saw that? The color change took place gradually and the cursor changed to pointer. Same here. All right, color change took place gradually, cursor changed to pointer. Same here. Okay, in order to make the change more pronounced, let me make it 85%. Let me make the brightness 85%. This would allow you to change make the color change a little more visible, right? So refresh the page and now the color change is a little more visible. You see that? And it's also taking place gradually, and also you can see the cursor changing from an arrow to a pointer. All right, the one last thing I want to change is I want to change the color of this text, new code, to white. Just, again, a personal preference. You don't have to, but let me just do that. So I'm going to change color to white. I think it might look better, so let me do that. All right, and there you go. And now it makes the it makes the change more visible. Okay. All right, you know what? I can also do the same here. Let me try some change the color of the icons, the FontAwesome icon, the Twitter icon, and the Tumblr icon, just to white as well, just to keep it consistent. All right, so I will go to the I tag. I think that's what I used to change to color the icons, and let me see, where is the I tag here? Oh, yeah, hey, there it is. Well, no, that's the background color for the button. Oh, here it is, I tag here. Let me change the color also to white. Okay, and let me refresh the page, and I like this better. All right, this is better in terms of visibility, slightly better in terms of how it stands out, right? And now the color change on hover will be more easily visible. You see that? Because you have the icons as, color of the icons is white, the color change on hover becomes more visible, more pronounced. All right, so those are a couple of, again, the last couple of changes I did regarding the font color and regarding the on hover. These are not in the requirements. Once again, these are just things that I did just because it meets my sort of personal aesthetic preferences. But hey, look what happened here. If you notice here, our opening quote tag disappeared. All right, we cannot have that. The code has to be visible. Now you may have already hopefully guessed why this thing disappeared, because we have changed the color of all our icons to white, right? So these icons, when we change it to white, they're still visible because they're on a dark gray background, so we can still see these icons. But this icon is on a white background, so obviously when we changed the icon color to white, it merged with the background and hence it is invisible. So clearly we should change this color to something non-white, and the way to do that would be to use the specific class name for that icon. The icon for the opening quote has a class name of far quote left, so that's what we will use. And I will come down here, I will use the class name, and I will give it a color of black. Okay, and now when I refresh the page, there you go, it is back. Okay, so again, some cosmetic changes just to align or to basically make it according to my sort of the kind of look and feel I prefer. All right, I don't think there is anything else here, so now we can turn our attention to coding the JavaScript. All right, so let's go to our JavaScript file, right? So here, as you may recall, we had opened this JavaScript file, right? Clearly it's empty because we haven't coded it now, and that's what we are going to do now. Now, before I start writing the code, let me explain to you the approach that I'm going to use to code this app. Right, so I'm just going to write some stuff here as I speak, so that you maybe it'll help you easier. Maybe it'll help make it easier to follow the approach that I'm going to describe. So the way I'm going to code the functionality is that I'm going to first create, or I'm going to first store quotes in an object. Let me rephrase that. I'm going to create a collection of quotes, okay, and create a collection of corresponding authors, okay, and I'm going to create a collection of colors. All right, that's the first thing I'm going to do. Now, why am I going to do that? Well, I need to display quote every time the new quote button is clicked, right? Every time this button is clicked, the new quote button is clicked, I need to display a quote, its respective author, and additionally, as per my own sort of my own preference, I'm going to change the color of 6 elements to some color, right? And those 6 elements once again are the background, this background right here, the color of the opening quote, the color of the text for the author's name, and the background color of all these 3 buttons. So actually there's like 7 elements whose color I would like to change. Again, this is not specified in the requirement. I'll just do it to make our app a little more interesting, right? So those are the things that I will be changing the colors of every time the new quote button is clicked. So when the new quote button is clicked, 3 things should happen. There should be a new quote, there should be corresponding author name, and all the elements that I just described, their colors should change. Right? So that is why I need a bunch of colors. Right? So the collection, when I say a collection of quotes, and I'm going to make it specific. Let's say I'm going to say collection of 10 quotes. I'll create a collection of 10 corresponding authors, and I'll create a collection of 10 colors. All right. When I say collection, right, in JavaScript, there is a couple of ways to have a collection. One of them is obviously you can have an array. The other one is an object. Object is better suited, so I'm going to use an object here. So I'm just going to say I'm going to create basically an object of. So basically, when I say create a collection, what I'm saying is I create an object of 10 colors. Okay, create an object of 10 corresponding authors, and create an object of 10 colors. All right, so these are the 3 sort of our data stores that I will create first. And then what I would do, then every time the new quote button is clicked, I will generate a random number. Okay, when new quote button is clicked, I will generate a random number. So I will write the code to generate a random number between 1 and 10. Okay, and use this number to choose a quote, an author, quote, its author, and a color. That is the approach that I'm going to be following. That is the approach that I'm going to be using to implement this app, to make this app work. Right? So hopefully you are on the same page. You have followed the logic that I just wrote up here. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, one additional thing that you also have to take care of is what should you display on page load. Remember, when you load the page, right now when you load the page, it's showing this stuff, right? It's showing, this random text, a random name, and it's showing a color, right? We have to actually show a quote. I can show this. This is just for while we were coding it up. So I use the lorem ipsum, right? So we can be showing this. So let me first get rid of this from our HTML, right? I'm going to go back here. I'm going to delete this. Okay. I'm going to delete the author name. Okay. And I'm going to delete the author name. All right. So now, going back to our script, right? whenever, now if we, sorry, going back to our page, if I refresh the page, everything should be empty. And there you go, everything is empty. All we see is the opening quote, we see the buttons, that's all, right? And we see this dash, right? And but when you load the page, you cannot have an empty box. You need to have a quote and you need to have its respective author, right? That's the behavior that is expected on page load, right? That is before you start clicking the button. Remember, you will not click the button until you've arrived on the page, right? And to arrive on the page, you have to load the page. So what should you display? You have to display something when you load the page. So that is something that we have to code for. That is the point I'm trying to drive, is that on page load, you have to be able to display something. You have to display an author, excuse me, you have to display a quote, its corresponding author, and you have to display, and you have to have some color for all the elements that I just talked about, those 7 elements, right? So we have to also code for that. So basically, let me write that down here. Code the behavior on page load. And what is that behavior? Display a quote, its author, and then my own personal sort of polishing type requirements where and a color for the various elements. I just walked you through the elements. I'm not going to list it here, but you know what I'm talking about, those 7 elements that I'm talked about. Okay. All right. So that is the approach that we will follow to code this app. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, as you know, in JQuery, you have to the first thing you have to write all your code within the document.ready function. So I'm going to write that here. Okay. We'll open the braces. So as if you don't know this, you hopefully can brush up on this, but basically, in jQuery, you write all your code within the document.ready function. This basically means that, hey, run the code only when the page is fully loaded. All right. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create the object of 10 quotes, the object of 10 corresponding authors, and create an object of 10 colors. Now, in order to save time, I already did that legwork. So I have created those. I already have created, the objects right here. I'm just going to copy paste here from here, right? So again, just to save time, I created these objects. So I have a, let me copy this here and I'll walk you through it over there. So I have these 3 objects, copy it here, go back to my script file, paste it here. So let me quickly walk you through these objects. So I have a quote obj, and what does it contain? It contains 10 quotes. You can see it has keys 1 through 10, and each key has a quote. Okay, so this is my object that contains the 10 quotes. I have a object called auth obj. This contains the authors. Okay, you notice here it contains 10 authors. Now each author is corresponding to the quote in the other object. So for example, Farah Gray is the author for the first quote in this object, in the quote obj object. All right. I'm sure you get that, because we have to maintain the parity. I cannot simply assign any author to any quote, right? We have to maintain the integrity and assign the correct author to the correct quote, to the respective quote, and it's very easy to do that. I have chosen the same key. So one author name at key 1 is the author name for the quote in key 1 in this object. Okay, and finally I have a col obj. This contains 10 colors in hex. Again, I have pre-populated these just to save time, and that is what basically we will be using as our objects, as our data store. All right. So now what do I have to do? So now, as I said, the first thing we have to do is write code for the behavior on page load. All right. So what behavior, what do we want on page load? On page load, what we want is we want some sort of we want a quote, we want its respective author, and we want a color. So how about we just choose, I don't know, we can choose anyone. All right. On page load, you can have you could have the same quote, the same author, and the same color each time you load the page. So basically, if you went to this page and you kept on refreshing it, right? It's okay if you get the same author, same quote, and the same color for the element. It's okay if you did that, right? So one way to do that is basically to choose a number between 1 and 10, right? Choose a number between 1 and 10. So let's say I choose, I don't know, let's say I choose 6. right? So what I'll do is I will obviously need a variable that I will then assign to 6. So let's say let R&D equals 6, right? And then I will use this integer 6, which is stored in R&D, to pick the 6th item from each of the arrays, right? Pretty easy, right? And the way you do that is you basically use jQuery code to select that. So first off, I want to pick the author. I want to pick, excuse me, I misspoke. I want to pick the quote and display it there. So quote is in our object COT quote obj. So when you use jQuery, I need to pick a quote from this object and store it in here, store it and display the quote here in this P element, right? That's the place we need to display our quotes. And this P element has an ID of text. So the way we can do that is we just go here, we choose the element where we need to display the quote, and that element's ID is text. And then we apply the text method on there, jQuery text method. And here we will simply choose that particular quote from the object. The object name is quote obj. Okay, and within square braces we will supply R&D. Remember, we have already initialized to R&D to 6. Now you can choose any number as long as it's between 1 and 10. That's totally fine, right? So we do that. Now if we do that, if I go back to my page and refresh it, I should see some quote here, and there you go. We are seeing a quote here. Isn't that nice? All right, pretty cool. Now let me put the author there. The author is in the element whose ID is author. So I will pick that element. This is how you choose an element, select an element to manipulate in jQuery. You basically, dollar and parentheses, and within quotes you use the hash sign for IDs. Apply the text method, and now I have to choose the author name from the auth obj, right? So here you go, pass R&D. Okay, so now we should see an author name here. Let me refresh it, and there you go, we have the author name. And again, this is the correct author name for this quote. Oh, by the way, I'm sure you're noticing that we're seeing some weird characters here, and I'll show you how to fix that. I think I know what's going on here, but give me a minute. Let me finish let me finish the code for the page load, and then I will help you fix this weird stuff that we're seeing here. Okay, so we now have the quote and its author. Right now, as I said, the couple of polishing cosmetic requirements that I added is that I want to have some nice color for the background, for the the color of the icon here, the opening quote, the text of the quote. I need to have the same color. I'd like to have the same color. The text of the author, I'd like to have the same color, and the background of these 3 buttons. Right. So let me choose that color now. The way to do that is you choose those things. So first, let me change the background color of this big element. As you know, this is a section, so I'm going to choose that by the tag name section, and I'm going to apply the CSS method here, and I'm going to apply. I want to change the background color, right? So I'll choose the background color property, and the color is going to be supplied by our object colobj, right? So I'll put colobj. And within parentheses, I'll put R&D because that's our pointer. That's the number we have chosen, right? Now you will notice that our color of the background will change. And look, it changed to whatever that color that I chose, right? Now clearly, right, I want to apply the same to the other elements. Again, this is just a personal preference, so I'm going to keep doing that. The next element that I want to change is this opening quote. I want to change it to the same color. So I will go here. I will select the opening quote as far quote left. Okay, I will apply the CSS method, and here I'm changing the color of it. I'm not changing the background color. I'm changing the color of this. I'm going to change the color to the same. I'm going to pick the color from our colobj object. I'll supply the key. Okay. There's something that went wrong here. Oh yeah, I missed a quote, closing quote here. Now it should be good. Right now you will see the color of this opening quote will also change to this dark pink or whatever that color is. And look, it changed, right? So I just have to now change the color of the text for this quote, color of the text for the author, and the background color of the 3 button, right? So let me change the color of the text for the quote. So that would be, I would say the quote is in the element text, so I'll choose the element with its ID, apply the CSS method, color, and sorry, I don't need quotes here. I just do COL OBJ RND. Okay, and you will, if you come here, you will see the color of this also change to pink, right? Like just like that. And let me do the same for the author. So select the author, which is the ID for the element that has the author is author. I'll select the ID. I'll select that element using its ID. CSS color, and let me just copy paste this, right? I don't need to keep typing it again. All right, there you go. So this should change the color of the text of the author. Now let me change the color of the buttons, the background color of each button. For that, I just need to select, I can select all the buttons at once by just using the button name, CSS, and I'll just copy paste this. I just copy paste this because it's the same, and this should take care of it. So now when I go to this page, everything should be dark pink. I mean, all the oh, okay. So something, oh, excuse me, I need to make it background color. It's not color, it's background color. That's why we got a weird sort of color combination in the buttons. This should fix it. And there you go. So now, as we can see, the background of the parent element, the color of the opening quote, the color of the text for the quote, the color of the text for the author's name, and the background color of all 3 buttons is the same color. All right, so we have successfully implemented our on-load behavior. So whenever you load the page, you will see the same stuff. Okay, now let's first quickly fix this. So basically the reason this is happening is that we have not specified a encoding. We haven't basically specified the encoding set or the encoding key here. What I mean by that is you have to use the meta tag. You have to go to your head section here, and you have to basically include a meta tag here, right? So you include a meta tag, and you specify an attribute called char set. So that attribute basically says that it tells you what coding formula to use, right? So we're going to use UTF-8, right? And this should fix the problem. So if I go back here and look, this is the weird sort of characters we're seeing. This should go away, and it does. All right, so that's what it was. Feel free to read up. We basically had to include a meta tag in our head section like we did, right? And we had to basically use the char set attribute and set it to UTF-8. So that's what I did here. All right, so if you're not clear on what this is, feel free to look it up, right? So now we have implemented our on-load behavior, which is like this. Now let's move on to implementing the other behavior, which is what happens when we click the new code button, right? As I mentioned up here, when I click the new code button, I basically will generate a random number between 1 and 10, and then use that number to choose an item from each of the 3 objects. Choose a quote, choose its corresponding author, and choose a color, right? So let me first generate the random number here. So actually I'm going to be generating the random number once the new code button is clicked, right? So we have to place this code, basically within the, this whole behavior that I'm talking about should take place when the new code button is clicked. Right now when I click this, nothing happens, right? But we want something to happen. Basically, we want every time we click the new code button, we want a quote, we want a new code, we want its corresponding author, and we want all these colors to change. So we basically have to first, make sure we define the behavior of the button within the click function. So the button's ID is new code, so we'll select the button, new code. Okay, apply the click function to it, apply a handler function to it, like so. Okay. So now, whatever we would like to happen when the new code button is clicked, we have to write the code here. Okay, we basically have to write all that code here. So the first thing that I want to do when the new code button is clicked, as I said, is to generate a random number, right? So let me generate a random number here. Now, what I want to do is I already have a variable R&D. So I'm going to basically use that variable R&D, all right, and say, okay, because we already have this variable R&D set to 6, right? We don't have to preserve that 6. R&D does not have to always have 6, because that is a number we are doing only on page load. After that, the value of this variable can change. It can be anything, right? It's only on page load that we are initializing it to 6 or 5, or like I said, you can choose any number as long as it is between 1 and 10, right? But whatever number you choose, let's say I make it 5, right? We don't need R&D to be 5 all through the program execution, right? R&D should be initialized to some value between 1 and 10 at the very beginning when the page loads, right? After that, R&D can take on any other value, right? So we can reuse. What I'm trying to say is that we can reuse R&D, and R&D is where we will store our random number. Now, if you are familiar with random number, right? Whenever you want to generate a random number between two numbers, you have to basically do a little bit of manipulation. So this is the way you would do it. So let me just math.floor, and here math.random. You know what, let me explain this to you as I build it out so that you get a sense of why I'm writing this code. So basically, JavaScript provides a function called math.random that spits out random numbers between 0 and 1, 0 inclusive, 1 non-inclusive. So basically, there's a function JavaScript has which is called math.random, right? And when you call this function, it returns a decimal number between which could be 0 all the way to 0.99, right? So basically, it returns a decimal number between 0 and 1, 0 inclusive, 1 not inclusive, right? So that's what we're going to use. But obviously, it's not gonna help us if you have a decimal number. We need a number between 1 and 10, right? So in order to make that happen, we multiply this by 10. Okay, so this will return a number which is, anywhere from 0 to 9.9, right? Now obviously, if it's 0, it doesn't help us, right? If it's 0, it doesn't help us. So we have to basically add 1, because if it's 0, then it should be 1, right? So we have to add 1. All right, so I have to put this in parentheses. Okay, so basically now what I have is this code. What it'll do is it'll generate a number between 0 and 9.9. Okay, it'll generate a number between 0 and not 9.9 and 10.9. Okay, this will return a number. This code will return a number between 0 and 10.9. Okay, remember, math.random returns a number between 0 and 9.9. So if you multiply that with 10, your range becomes between 0 and 10.9, right? Now clearly, we don't need a decimal number. So we need a way to basically make this a integer between 1 and 10, right? So the way you do that is you put this whole thing inside a math.floor function. What math.floor does is basically rounds down any number to the nearest whole number. That's what math.floor does. So when we get 10.9, it'll round it down to 10. Okay, all right, so that is the code that we wrote to generate a random number between 1 and 10. Now, wouldn't it be great to test it out? Yeah, absolutely. Let's test it out. So I'm going to print this value to the console. I'm just going to print, say, R&D is, okay, R&D. All right, so let us print this value to console. So I'm going to go to this. I'm going to go open up my console, and you'll see the console at the bottom of the screen. All right, now all I'm doing here, the only code that I wrote within the click function, right, is the code to generate a random number, store it in this variable R&D, and then print that variable to the console. So basically, I've only written 2 lines of code in the click function. In other words, whenever we click this new code button, 2 things should happen. First, there should be a random number generated between 1 and 10, which should be stored in R&D, and then we should see in the console, we should see what that value of R&D is, and we are doing that just to make sure that our random number code is working properly, right? So let's go here. I'm going to refresh the page, and I'm going to click this button. All right, I'm going to click this button here, and again, when I click this button, you should see something here. You should see a statement like R&D is and an integer number if our code that we wrote is working properly. If our code that we wrote here, I'm talking about these 2 lines of code, if these 2 lines of code that we wrote is working properly, we should see here a statement called R&D is something, some number. So let's do that. All right, R&D is 9, great. R&D is 9 again, okay. R&D is 9 again. Oh my goodness, look at this. We got 3 successive random numbers which are exactly the same. Please make a note of this, because this is a bit of an issue, right? The issue is not that our random number is going out of range. You know, it is within range. We need a random number between 1 and 10, right? But please make a note of this. I will get back to this topic in a few minutes. Let me click it again. Okay, now we got a different random number. We got 8. Okay, we got 7. We got 5. We got 3. We got 7 again. We got 8. We got 6. We got 2. Okay, so we are getting all random numbers between 1 and 10, which is great. But let me go back to the original point I made, which is that in the very beginning, we saw 3 random numbers that were generated, 3 successive random numbers that were generated, which were exactly the same, right? Which were all lines. Now that is a problem, because remember, we are choosing the random number generator. We are using the random number that is generated by this code to choose our quote, our author, and a color. So if this code keeps generating the same random number, right, then the user will see the same quote multiple times, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times. You get that? Right? Again, if the random number generated is the same on successive attempts, you know, we will use that random number. We are using the random number to choose our author, choose our quote, the author name, and the color. So if we choose the same random number, if we get the same random number back to back, we're going to end up displaying the same quote, the same author, and the same color. Clearly, that is not ideal. That is not that is not a random code generator. A random code machine should pull out a random code, a truly random code, each time the button is clicked. So how do we ensure that whenever we call a random number function, it gives us a different random number than the previous one? See, that's the issue, right? We're not saying that we cannot repeat 1 through 10, right? If a user clicks the random number button 100 times, clearly, you know, the quotes, you know, the random numbers between 1 and 10 will get repeated. That is not the issue. Our issue is that back to back, the successive random number generator should not be the same. That successive random numbers generated by this code should be different. That is the issue we have to solve. So the way to do that, one quick way, one easy way to do that would be to simply put this inside a do while loops, right? So we can say that, hey, do this, meaning generate the random number, do this whole thing, right? Generate a random number while meaning as long as, that's the other way to say, while the random number generated is not the same as the previous random number. Okay, now you may ask, well, where are we storing the previous random number? We're not storing it. You're absolutely right. We are not storing the previous random number. So clearly we have to store it. How do we store it? Well, we can declare a variable here. We say let previous R&D equals, I don't know, I'll make it I'll make it, you know what, I will make it the same as our original value of R&D. Make it 5. Okay, because remember, once we load the page, we're going to initialize R&D to 5. So basically we'll be showing the 5th quote, the 5th author, and the 5th color, right? So then when the user clicks new quote, you cannot show the 5th quote, the 5th author, and the 5th color, right? You have to make sure that the random number, the first random number generated when the user clicks the button, the new quote button, the first time after page load, that random number is not the same as 5, right? So we have basically, that's what we need to check. So I have created another variable, previous R&D, and initialize it to the same number, 5, and I just went over the reason with you. And now what we can say is that, hey, generate a random number as long as it is not equal to 5. The way we do that is we can say while previous R&D equals R&D. So what are we saying here? We are saying that, hey, this line of code, if I were to say this line of code in simple English, I would say, hey, keep doing this, meaning keep generating a random number till these two numbers are this, till you get a number which is not the same as the previous R&D, right? In other words, keep generating a random number, keep doing this while the previous R&D and the new R&D are the same. Meaning every time you generate a random number, compare it with the previous R&D. If it is the same, you can move forward. You got to generate another, you got to give it another try. You've got to generate another random number. So basically keep doing this till you get a different random number, with different compared to the previous random number, right? So hope this explanation is clear. So now, okay, obviously another thing we have to do is you have to equate whatever number that comes out of this loop, we have to equate it to previous R&D, right? So previous R&D first should be equal to R&D, should be equated to R&D, right? Here what we're saying is that, see, this loop will keep going until these two numbers are the same, meaning as long as the R&D generated by this random number generator is equal to the, does not, remains the same as the previous R&D, this loop will keep going. This loop will only exit when the random number generated is different than the previous R&D, all right? So once, only in that situation, this loop will end. So then R&D will have a value which is different from the previous R&D. So the first thing we have to do is we have to store that value in previous R&D for the next time the user clicks the new code button, right? Because remember, if it's a new R&D, we have to store it in previous R&D so that the next time the user clicks the new code button, we are comparing the current value of R&D with the newly generated R&D value, right? So now if we go back to our page, and now when we click the new code button, I think with this change that we made, we should never see the same random number back to back. We should always see a different random number back to back, right? Now overall, there may be some numbers may get repeated, and that's okay, but we should never have back-to-back random numbers repeated, and that's what I think we will see when we go back to our code. So go back to our HTML page. So let me go back to our HTML page. Let me refresh it, and now I will keep clicking the new code button and keep an eye if we get a duplicate random number in back-to-back tries. Okay, I click it once, so we got 10. Clicked it the second time, we got 2. Third time, 10, and that's okay, right? Again, back-to-back, we should not get the same number. But if we get the same number after skipping one, that's okay, right? 4, 9, 7, 10. Okay, see, we have not gotten, we have a problem here. R&D 6, that is, yeah, so that's not going to work. So there's something going on here. So let's take a look here. Previous R&D equals R&D. Okay, while previous R&D equals R&D. So, oh, I think what the mistake we made is that we are initializing it to 5 every time. That is a mistake we're making. See, we initialize previous R&D to 5 within the click function, right? So every time we are clicking this button, previous R&D is getting overwritten. Okay, remember, once we come to this part of the code where we generate a random number, again, as I explained to you a few moments ago, we keep generating the random number till we get a unique, till we get a different value of R&D. Different from what? Different from the previous value of R&D, right? But if we are initializing R&D within the click function, we are basically saying, hey, keep generating R&D, until R&D is not equal to 5. That's clearly not, we basically should not be overwriting the value of previous R&D, right? It should be preserved for the next time when user clicks the new code button. So in other words, we have to move this out of here, out of the click function loop. We have to put it here somewhere. Okay, now with this change, we should never get back-to-back same random numbers, right? So let me refresh the page. Let me click the new code button. Okay, we got a 7, got a 4, we got a 3, we got a 7 again, and that's okay. We got 7 after 2 other numbers, so we're fine. 8, 5. Now look, we are not, I've clicked it many times. You hopefully can hear it. Can you see a single repeated random number? No, and you will not see it because we fixed that issue, right? Again, the issue was that we had put previous R&D within the click function. So basically every time we were clicking this button, we were assigning 5 to previous R&D, right? So it was not checking, it was not truly checking the value of whatever was the value of the previous R&D. It was checking it with 5 all the time. So that was a mistake we had made. We fixed it. We declared our variable outside the click function. And now we should never get the same random number back to back. All right, guys. So I know this explanation was a bit lengthy, but hopefully this helped. So let's keep going. So now, you know what? Now that we have made certain that we are not going to get the same random number back to back, we can close our console and you can also do away with this console.log statement. Okay, so now we have successfully generated a random number which is going to be different from the previous random number. So now what do? Now we basically have to select the, we have to select that particular item, right? When I say that particular item, I'm talking about we have to select whatever random, whatever number, whatever integer is there in the variable R&D. We have to use that to select the quote, right? Select the author name and select the color. In other words, we have to do all this stuff again. So I can simply copy this code here and bring it in here. That's it, right? I don't have to write anything. I don't have to rewrite this, right? Because again, we have to do the same stuff. We have to choose the appropriate quote from the quote obj and put it in the element whose ID is text. Then we have to choose the appropriate author name from the object auth obj and put it inside the element whose ID is author. Then we have to change the background color of the section, the parent element, and by choosing the color from the col obj object, right? Then we change the color of the far quote left, right? Then we change the color of the text of the quote using this line of code. And finally, we change the color of the author, the text of the author. And one thing we forgot to copy was change the background color of the 3 buttons. Okay, so there we go. So basically we have to redo what we did on page load, and that should make sense to you. So now let's go back to our page. Now refresh it. Now when I click this button, you should see a new quote, its corresponding new author, and you should also see all these colors changing. So let's check it out. Look, we have a new quote and the colors changed. Look, we have a new quote and the colors changed. We have a new quote and all those colors for the respective elements changed. All right, you can keep clicking and you will see different color, different code. So hopefully you can see, guys, that our app is pretty much working exactly as we expected to, right? Again, keep clicking. Every time you'll get a different color for all the elements and you'll get a different quote. All right, now let's take a look at a couple of ways we can refine, we can improve the code here a little bit, right? Now, first off, you should immediately notice that we have a repetition. These 7 lines of code are basically again repeated here. Now, as you know, in coding, there's a very important principle called DRY, don't repeat yourself. So this is a very good and obvious opportunity to do some refactoring. So how do we not repeat this code? Well, one thing we can do is we can put these 7 lines of code, which are repeated here as well. We can put them in a function, right? We can put this code. We can put these lines of code inside a function and simply call that function, every time the button is clicked, right? So we can do that. So let's do that, right? So I'm going to write a function using arrow notation. Okay, hopefully that you are able to, you know what arrow notation is. Now, in order to write a function using arrow notation, you use the word const. I'm going to call this function change quote. Okay, change quote. And using arrow notation, this is how you write the function. You write equal to sign, you write open and close parentheses, right? And you write this equal to greater than, and you have opening closing braces. Now, I'm writing this function to basically redo all these 7 steps. So basically, I'll just put these 7 lines of code inside the arrow function. There you go. That's all I need to do, all right, to create the arrow function, because the lines of code are already written, right? Another thing that we have to pay attention to is that, well, this function requires an input argument, right? Remember, we are going to call this function, and we are going to be selecting specific items from 3 objects: the quote obj, the auth obj, and the col obj, right? And whenever you select items from an object, you need the key, right? So here we have to supply the key. Now, previously we could use R&D because we were directly supplying R&D to directly using R&D, right? Right now these lines of code are inside a function, so we are better off not using R&D. We can use a different function. We will obviously refer to R&D, but R&D will not be accessible, will most likely not be accessible. Although, let me take that back. R&D, we have declared R&D as a global variable right here, so it would be accessible, but probably not good to take a chance. So let's give it an input argument of num, let's say, right? And change all of these to num. Okay, so whenever you call this function, you will pass to it the variable R&D. R&D will come in here. It will be stored in the local variable num, right? And then num will be used to choose all your specific items from the various objects. Okay, now again, these are JavaScript function basics. These are JavaScript function fundamentals. So if you are a bit shaky on this, feel free to brush up on it, Google it, or go back to your notes, however you learned it. But these are some JavaScript function fundamentals basics. Right now, again, I could have gone with R&D. I could have nothing here. All right, I could have had all these num to be R&D because I have declared R&D as a global variable, so it should be accessible from within any function. But I just, as a matter of practice, I'm creating a local variable, local input argument to this function. Which function is this? Well, this function is called change quote, right? And I have again written this function not in the regular function format. I have written it as using the arrow function. So that's another thing. If you're not very clear on, feel free to research it, Google it, so that you can brush up on it. But I have declared this function change quote as an arrow function, and I have given it a local input argument called num. And using num, I'm going to be choosing all of these things, all of the the quote, the author, and the colors. Okay, so now that we have put in our all the code inside a function, we don't need this here, right? We do not need this here, right? Here we can simply call change quote and pass it R&D. You see how quickly our size of our code went down. It became much more compact, right? So now we don't have to repeat it. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole reason why we created this this function change quote, right? So that we can call it. Now, what about on page load? So this is great that we have created this function, and we are calling this function within the new quote click function, right? So basically, whenever new quote is clicked, right, we do generate the random number, and we pass the random number to this function change code, and the change code basically will then display and do its thing, right? But what about on page load? Let's see if page load works properly, right? I'm going to load the page, and look, it is not working properly, just as I had suspected. Well, why is that the case? Well, that is the case because now no longer we are passing, right? No, we are not calling the function on page load. Remember, previously these lines of code were basically implementing the on page load behavior, right? These are the lines of code that we were using to implement the on page load behavior, right? But now we have placed these lines of code inside a function. So obviously, in order for these lines to be executed on page load, we have to call the function, right? So we first call the function here. So what I'm saying is that after we declared the function, in order for these lines of code to be executed on page load, we have to basically call the function here, all right? So we say, okay, we come here, we call the function change code, and we pass the value R and D. Okay, now with this line of code, with this one line of code, whenever we load the page, we should never see this empty box. We should see something here. Okay, there you go. Look, we are seeing, you know, a page with a quote and an author and a color for all the various elements, right? So that is the other change we needed to make since we have placed these lines of code inside change code, right? We basically called this function, and we're calling this function on page load, and we are calling this function when the new code button is clicked. All right, so that is something that we had to do, and we did a quick bit of refactoring in order to make our code a bit compact. All right, guys, so now it's time to basically, test this, make sure that our code is working as per requirement. So as I did in my previous video, as I explained to you, we have the FreeCodeCamp provides a space where they have some automated tests running. This is the space right here. So what we'll do is we'll basically bring our code here. We will copy and paste our code here. Okay, we will bring it in here. I will paste it. I will paste it here. Okay, let me bring my CSS here. Okay, paste it here. Okay, and let me bring my JavaScript jQuery code as well. Okay, and I'm going to paste it here. All right, let me save it and let me run the test. The test is, I believe, called random code machine. And here it is. And now the way you know that I am passing all the tests is when I run the test, if this button turns green with the number of tests and indicates with the number of tests that are passing, you'll know that tests are passing. So I'll run this. Okay, so we have 2 errors. All right, let's see what those errors are. Oh, we missed a ID. So one of the A elements, the A element, the anchor element that we put around our Twitter button, that needs to have an ID of tweet-code. So that is something we have to do. And the other thing, I can tweet the current code by clicking tweet.code. So both errors are related to the same thing. So basically we have to go to our HTML, and here is the problem. Here is we have to basically give this guy an ID, right? An ID of tweet dash quote. Okay, and that was the part that we were missing here. I think that's all there is to this error. So I'm basically going to copy this here, and you know what? Let me do this. Let me basically come back here and put this here. All right, let me run the test, and look, all 12 tests are passing. That's exactly what we expected. And that's exactly what we should see, rather, not expected. That's exactly what we should see if all our automated tests are passing. So guys, if you're still with this video, give yourself a pat on the back. We were able to successfully code this app and meet all the requirements. Now, I want to do one more. I want to demonstrate one more way to code this app. All right. I'd like to share different approaches. So I want to make, show you one more way to code this app, right? And that has to do with, instead of using a fixed set of colors, how about we generated colors on the fly. We created colors on the fly. So that's the approach that I want to share with you. Right now, one thing that I want to also mention to you is, if you wanted to have on page load different quotes and authors, you could basically reuse the random number generator, right? So we gave our R&D a fixed value of 5. Right? We gave it a fixed value of 5, so that every time we load the page here, right? This is our app. Every time we load the page, we are going to see the 5th quote, the 5th author name, and the color which is in 5th position in our object COLOBJ, right? Because we have initialized our initial variable to 5, every time we load the page, we're going to see the same 5th quote, right? Because we're going to be choosing the 5th item from this quote OBJ. We're going to see the same 5th author, okay, and we're going to see the same 5th color. All right, so that is great. It works. Obviously, the tests are passing, and there are no requirements around this, and everything is working great. But in case you wanted to have a different quote, a different author, and a different color each time you loaded the page, you could basically reuse this. You could basically, generate your R&D. You could basically, put this, you reuse or generate an random number. So instead of doing this here, right, you could basically put the same thing over there, right? You could basically put the same thing over there, which is like, if you want to try it out, right? I'm not gonna make it, I'm not gonna implement it fully, but just to give you a sense of it, right? You just you can put this here, right? And if you did this each time, it should come up with a different random number, right? It should generate a different random number, right? I think in actually what you don't equate this here. You have to do it like this, right? And you have to make some changes. You have to declare R&D to some number. Now again, I'm not going to implement it. You have to declare R&D to any number. You can declare it to 1, 5, whatever. And then once you come out of here, right, you generate a new R&D number. And once again, you have to equate this to R&D, right? You have to make these changes. Again, I don't want to implement this. This is something that if you like, you can try. I'm going to put it back to the original, the way it was, right? But that's another way you could use to generate basically a random number. All right. Now the second approach that I want to talk about is the approach is around not using this COL OBJ. Right. So we have used COL OBJ here, right, which is basically an object which has a fixed number of colors, right? How about if we generated the hex color on the fly? All right. How would we do that? Well, we would basically need to write some code that generates hex number, right? Remember, our COL OBJ has colors specified in using hex code. So instead of using this, how about if we wrote some code to generate some hex code on the fly? Okay, and the way you can do that is you can basically, right, you can basically, the code to generate the lines of code you need to generate hex code is fairly simple, right? So let's say basically what you have to do is a hex code always starts with a hash sign, right? And you need 6 digits after that, right? So that's basically hex code. So the way you would do that is first of all you would need to have a variable, let's say hex code, and initialize it with the hash sign, right? Because that's the first item you need. That's the first element of any hex code, is always the first character of any hex code is always a hash sign. So we first create a variable and we assign it the hash sign, right? We initialize it with the hash sign, and then we basically have to do the same thing, right? We have to generate a set of random numbers, right, between 0 and 16. Remember, hex code goes from 0 to 16, right? So it has, so you have to basically generate a random number, and the way you would do that is you would use the same approach that we used here. Remember, we used a do while loop, right? So that is one way you can use it, right? Or you could also use a while loop. So the way you would do that is you would simply say while hex code length is less than 7, hex code length is less than 7, right? You should keep adding, keep generating a random number and keep appending it to the hex code variable. All right, so this is hex code equals hex code plus, and what do I do here? I will generate a random number, okay, between 0 and 15, excuse me. All right, and I will convert that to a hexadecimal string. So that is how I can generate a hex code using these lines of code. So let me write that out so you can then follow. Okay, so what I can do is hex code plus math.round. Put that here. I need to put this here. Math.round, math.random. Okay, and I'm just going to write this code here, and hopefully you'll be able to follow based on the explanation. This is not a dot. This should be times 15, and all right, math.random times 15 to string hexadecimal. Okay, this should give me a nice hex code. We should get a nice hex code coming out of it. Okay, so all I'm doing here is that, hey, while hex code length, dot length is a JavaScript method that returns the number of characters in any string. So we have basically set up a string variable. We have initialized it to a hash sign, right? And then we are using a while loop on it. We're saying, hey, basically, up to 6 times, keep generating a random number between 0 and 15 and convert that to a hexadecimal string. That's what we're doing here, right? So basically what we should get coming out of this while loop is a 6-digit hex code, right? In order to test that, let's do a quick console.log here. Console.log. I'll say hex code is hex code. Okay. So actually, I may need to. All right, let's try that out, right? Let's see what we get, right? So I just basically put a console.log statement. Let me go back here. Let me refresh the page and let me open up the console. And now I should see. Look, okay. So there is an issue here. We're not getting a hex code. We are getting. Why is that? Let's see, what did we do here? What mistake to string 16? That's the way it should be. Okay, maybe I'm missing parentheses here, maybe. Oh, that's the problem. I don't have a random number. That is the problem. Okay, so I basically needed to put math.random is a function, so you have to have parentheses at the end of it. Let's see if we get something here. Okay, we are missing a token here on line 49, so we are missing something again here. Xcode. Okay, what's the problem here? Times 15. Oh, math dot random. Oh, I need a closing parenthesis. I think that's the error. Hopefully that's will fix it, and it does. Okay, so we had some typos. The first thing that I was missing here was I did not have I did not put write it as a function. Math dot random is a function. I need to put these parentheses at the end. And the second thing is I was missing a closing brace. So that's what I put, and I am good. Now look, every time we reload the page, we're going to get a nice hex number here. Now we haven't used it, so that's why when we load the page, we get the same color, right? We haven't used it, but the point that I'm trying to make is that we have written code to successfully generate a hex code. Now, this hex code generation also will face the same issue that we faced with the random number, which is that we should not get two successive hex codes being identical. We should not get that, right? If we get that, then that's a problem, right? So we obviously, we should avoid that, right? So how do we ensure that two consecutive generations of hex code are not the same? Well, we can use the same approach we used to make sure that our random numbers, two successive random numbers, are not the same. Well, what did we do there? Well, we had a variable called previous R&D where we stored the value of any currently generated R&D, right? And then the next time when we generated R&D, we compared that to previous R&D. And if it was the same, we kept generating a new R&D. So basically, we only took a R&D value as valid if it was different from what was stored in the variable previous R&D. So basically, we can do the same thing here. But before we do that, we know that we're going to be calling the hex code generation every time we click the new code button, right? We know that we are going to be needing a different hex code, a different color when we click the new code button. At the same time, when we upload the page. So in other words, we will be using these lines of code multiple times. So why not put it in a function, right? That would again allow us to minimize repeated code or avoid writing code repeatedly, right? So let me first do that. First, let me get rid of this thing because we already know we're getting a nice hex number. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this code inside a function. And I'm going to again write the function using arrow function. So I'm going to call it hex color generator is the name of the function. And I'm going to, again, I'm writing it using arrow function. So hopefully you are able to follow. Okay. And opening and closing braces. So I'm just going to put this here. So this is my arrow function right here. Okay, I made a mistake here. Let me just put this here. Okay, so now whenever I need a new hex color, I can just call this function hex col gen. Obviously, one thing I have to do is I have to return hex code, right? If I don't return it, then it's not going to work. So I have to return hex code here, right? So return hex code, right? I do that so basically you're returning hex code. Again, this is a JavaScript function fundamentals. So whenever you call hex code, right, you have to return this value. You have to return the hex code that is generated by this function. So that is why you need a return statement, right? So now one thing we will need to do is, well, we don't need this here. Actually, we can, we don't need this here. We can put this. This can be a local variable, right? Because this is something we use inside. This can be a local variable, but we do need new variables in order to store the current value of hex code and the previous value of hex code, right? So let's declare those variables and we'll make them global variables. We'll say let new hex code, we'll initialize it to an empty string, and let previous hex code will initialize it to an empty string. All right. So now, right, what we have to do is we have everything pretty much set up. We have our function that will return to us a hex code, right? And we have our two variables that will show the hex code. Now, let's first go through or decide or basically implement how we can use hex code every time we load the page, right? So whenever we load the page, we obviously need to call the function hex colgen, right? We need to call the function so we can get a hex color, right? So we will call the function. At the same time, when we call the function, we have to make sure that this function does not have the same as the previous hex color, right? So we have to again use a do while loop. So what do I do in the do? I say in the do part of the while loop, I say, hey, new hex code. So basically give me a new hex code. And how do I get a new hex code? I call the function hex colgen that we just wrote, right? I call this function. I said, hey, and I have to put this within curly braces, not parentheses. Okay, so I'm saying, hey, get me a new hex code and store it in the variable new hex code while previous hex code is equal to new hex code. In other words, keep producing a hex code till previous hex code and new hex code are different, right? Again, I went over this explanation when I explained to you how to get unique random numbers in back-to-back attempts. That's the same explanation that holds true here. So I'm not going to obviously repeat it. Hopefully you got that when I walked you through the random number explanation. All right. So now what we're saying, hey, so every time I get a new hex code, what do? I update previous hex code with the value of the current hex code. Okay. And I can use the new hex code. I can use the new hex code, right? How do I use a new hex code, right? Now remember, the new hex code we have to use is to color the background and the text color. Now in the previous implementation, we were using the color object. Right? So that's why we could all get away with using the same random number. We generated a random number once, and we passed that number to the color object and grabbed whatever color was there at that position in the color object. But clearly we are not doing that now, so we have to make some changes. So first thing I will do is I will comment out. We're not going to be using the color object, so I'm going to comment this out. Okay, we're not going to be using that, right? We're also going to rewrite this function, right? So I'm going to comment this out as well, right? We will reuse the name, right? But we have to rewrite it, right? So I'm just going to copy this here so I can make the changes that I need to make. Okay, now remember, when we use in our new implementation, we are generating a new hex code. We are generating a hex code, right? So we have to use the hex code. We are no longer going into the object colobj. That doesn't exist in our new implementation, right? We are generating a color on the fly by using our function hex colgen, right? Now when this function will return a hex code, meaning a hex color, and then we basically have to use this color, which is stored in our variable new hex code. We have to basically store this to color the various elements. So instead of using colobj, we can simply give it new hex code, right? So basically we copy this here, and wherever we see colobj, we replace it with new hex code. New hex code. Okay, now this should work. So obviously when we call change code, we still supplied R&D, because R&D is used to pick the quote and the author, so that part remains the same. So as you can see, I didn't change these two lines because these two lines are grabbing the quote and its author from the respective objects. Again, that part does not change. We are still need to use a random number to grab a random quote and its respective author. The part that we are changing is we are no longer using this COL OBJ color. We are no longer choosing from one of 10 preset colors. We are generating colors, new hex code colors on the fly, right? So in order to do that, that's the part that has changed in this function. All I've done is wherever we are coloring stuff, either the background or the color, I am using the hex code that has been generated. And where has that been generated? Well, we have to generate that, right? So how do we generate that? We have to call the function. So whenever we click the button, we have to call the function hex code col gen, okay, and this will return a hex code, right? So we store it in new hex code, okay, and then we update previous hex code with new hex code, all right, and then we call change code. So with these changes, I think it should work. Let me make sure there are no other gotchas that we've mixed here. Well, I think we are good here. So we call the function here, and we also call the function here. So let's see if it works. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to close this thing, I'm going to refresh the page, and look, we got a new color. We got the same quote and the author, but we got a new color. Now guess what? If I refresh the page again, you will see a different color for all the elements. Look here. The same quote and the author, but the colors have changed, right? Again, this is not needed as per requirements, but I'm doing it just to add a little more pizzazz to my app, and also hopefully demonstrate to you how you can generate hex colors on the fly. Look, you keep on refreshing, you get different colors, right? At the same time, when you click the new quote button, you're going to see a new quote, a new author, and a new color. Look. In other words, you can get a much more variety of colors in your app. That was the reason why I made this change. That was the reason why I implemented this new approach, which is by generating the hex color or the color using hex code on the fly, right? So now you can get much more variety for your colors, okay? So now I think the test should still work. It should still pass. So let's check it out. All right. So I'm going to basically copy this. Now again, we did not change our HTML. We did not change our CSS. So these should remain the same. All we did was we changed our JavaScript code. So, and let me put the new JavaScript code here, right? And now if I run the test, they still pass. And that's what we expect, because again, everything works. So guys, this concludes the development and the coding and the building of this app. All right. So hopefully you are, you gained, you saw how we started with just the requirements, and we were able to successfully code the app. And now look, it's working great. Every time we click on this, we get a different color and we get a different code. All right. The last thing I want to do here, guys, is to walk you through my GitHub. So below the video in the description section, I will be putting, or you already can see a GitHub link, right? That link, when you click, it will bring you to here. This is my public GitHub page. Once you come here, you will see a bunch of files. In this folder, on this page, in this repository, GitHub repository, it's called random code machine _1. You will see a bunch of files. Right now, you only see the README file, right? Don't worry about it. By the time you see this video, this page will be populated, and here you will see 4 more files below README. You will see a file for index.html. You will see a file for the styles, the CSS file, styles.css, and you will see 2 JavaScript files. The first JavaScript file will have the first implementation, and the second JavaScript file will have the second implementation. So as you remember, the first implementation is using the COL OBJ, right, where we chose colors from the COL OBJ object. We had 10 preset colors, and we chose the colors from there. That was the first implementation. And the second implementation that we just finished was we are no longer using the COL OBJ for our colors. We are generating colors on the fly using hex code and using the function. So I will put both the JavaScript files here in this GitHub page. Okay, so once again, when you come here, you should see 4 additional files, one for the HTML, one for the CSS, and 2 more JQuery, JavaScript JQuery script files. All right, guys, so that concludes this video. Hopefully you liked it. Hopefully you gained something out of it. So please, if you did, I would really appreciate if you can give me a like and also subscribe. I do plan to put more videos on this. And once again, right, my goal is not just to code live on the video. My goal is, as I code, to demonstrate, to expose sort of the thinking, some of the thinking that developers need to do while they code, right? How do they navigate through the various decisions? How do they choose the option that they do choose in order to code stuff? So that's my goal, and hopefully that is coming across. So thank you, and see you in the next video.